da gì nè, mà rách á, mai đắp một cái miếng vải ngay tại cái vai luôn, nhìn là biết nhà nghèo liền. Hỏi làm sao thì cái cô đó cũng mới trả lời á, trời ơi con tên là Hiền, bả là bà Chính Hiền. Thì bả mới nói là bữa nay á, bả từ ở trên Tân Châu An Giang á, bả bơi xuồng xuống tới dưới này nè, tới Vĩnh Long để mà kiếm chú Bảy. Hỏi chi thì bả nói là bả cần chú Bảy á giúp đỡ cho gia đình bả. Gia đình bả bây giờ đang bị một cái con quỷ nó thoát xác ra, bây giờ là nó quật lợi gia đình của bả. Mà cụ thể là cái ông chồng của bả, ổng đang nằm giật giữa ở nhà đây nè, đang chờ thời chờ chết rồi, không biết là chừng nào bị bắt đi. Cậu Bảy ổng nghe vậy thì ổng cũng hơi khó hiểu. Ổng mới nói ủa, quỷ thoát xác là cái gì? Hồi đó giờ lần đầu tiên tao mới nghe đó, đâu phải kể lại rõ ràng tường tận cho tao nghe coi. Thì cái cô Chính này cổ mới kể cho rõ ràng đầu đuôi vậy. Bà mới nói là không có giấu gì chú Bảy. Cái ông Chính á, chồng của bả đó, ổng cũng làm thầy luôn, chứ không phải là người bình thường. Mà tại sao là thầy mà bữa nay phải đi cầu cứu một cái người thầy khác là sao? Có chuyện bữa nay đây nè. Tại vì á, ổng hồi đó tới giờ ổng làm nghề cũng đã mười mấy 20 năm trời rồi. Vợ chồng của bà này trẻ lắm, mới có ngoài 30 hà, chứ đâu có phải là lớn tuổi gì đâu. Vậy mà người ta làm thầy. Làm thầy theo cái phái là thầy Lỗ Ban. Rồi ổng có biết thêm cái thuật luyện thiên linh cái nữa. Nhưng mà không biết làm sao nha, ổng á chỉ là luyện bùa luyện ngải để mà giúp đỡ người ta thôi. Ai mà có bệnh thì ổng sẽ phán bùa, ổng gỡ cho hết cái bệnh đó. Hoặc là có ai bị thư ếm gì đó thì ổng sẽ ra tay ổng gỡ, chứ ổng không có ếm ngược lại người ta. Chỗ nào có quỷ có ma, ổng bắt về nhà ổng nuôi. Ổng nuôi cho tới khi nào mà người ta hiền á, người ta không có còn cái oán hận nữa thì ổng sẽ cho người ta đi. Và đặc biệt là hồi đó tới giờ, cái chú Chính này nè, ổng làm thầy mà ổng chưa bao giờ lấy tiền của bá gia bá tánh một đồng nào hết. Tại vì ổng nói á, làm thầy là không có được nhận tiền của ai, nhận tiền là tổn phước dữ lắm. Chính vì vậy mà hai vợ chồng đâu có giàu có như người ta, nghèo rớt mồng tơ vậy đó. Nhưng cái nhiệm vụ của mình, cái nghiệp của mình đi giúp đời.
Just to give this story some context, I've never experienced sleep paralysis before until today. With that being said, I'm extremely open to the paranormal, having had many experiences throughout my life. After a long day at the beach, my family decided it would be a good idea to start heading home. We were all pretty tired, and for some reason, we decided to take separate cars. My dad and my two brothers were in his work truck, and my mom and I were riding in the family SUV. By the time we packed up and began to head home, the sun was already starting to set. We had already been driving down the highway for about 5 or 10 minutes before I started to get drowsy. I could see my dad and my brothers in the back seat of the truck, a few lanes away. I rolled up my window and decided to listen to my iPod, and before I knew it, I drifted off. I woke up, but I immediately knew that something weird was going on. I had a strange, euphoric feeling. It kind of felt good. So I sat there not moving. I was sitting there in the back seat, on the driver's side. Here in Australia, that's the right side of the vehicle. I was staring at the headrest in front of me. I tried to reposition myself to get comfortable so I could go back to recompose myself, but the pressure and stress of the situation resonated throughout my body like water rushing through my veins. It was both hot and cold at the same time. I tried to, that's when I saw it. I just can't see. That method was moving in a sort of eerie slow motion. I've never had motion sickness before in my life, but after having the feeling of moving fast, but actually moving painfully slow, it made me nauseous. I could hear the music playing in my headphones, only it sounded deep and distorted. All of a sudden, the weight and pressure that I was feeling intensified. I desperately tried to fight the urge to throw up when I saw something in the corner of my eye. I regained my composure for a second and focused in on my peripheral vision. A large white 18-wheeler came screeching off the end-ramp and veered across the lanes. Seeing it in slow motion only made it more heart-racing. I gasped and tried to scream. The inky thing I could feel was my heart. It felt like it was leaping out of my chest, literally about to burst through my ribcage. The 18-wheeler completely took out my dad's truck. I saw my dad's truck flip and roll under it as both vehicles came smashing into the SUV. Everything was moving slower than before. The initial impact felt like it lasted minutes. The windshield smashed immediately. I could see the metal twisting and crunching, getting closer and closer. It felt like time actually stopped at this point, and the mass-twisted pile of glass was inches away from me. All of a sudden, the pressure started to lift, and the wreckage slammed into my body. That's when I woke up. I was in the same position in my car, only I could move. I started to freak out, and Mom was like, "Are you alright? Do you need some water?" I told her that I felt like I was going to throw up, and she pulled over. We were in front of my dad, so they also pulled over and parked behind us. I got out of the car as traffic rushed past us. I started to hyperventilate a little bit. I began to calm down when I saw a white 18-wheeler coming up the in-ramp. It swerved and cut across 2 or 3 lanes. It almost loomed as if it was going to tip. Luckily, the driver regained control and no one was hurt. My heart dropped as I realized that in my sleep paralysis, I had some kind of premonition, and that if I hadn't gotten my mom to pull over, that truck may have obliterated my whole family. My sister developed sleep paralysis in the 1st grade, an unusual age to be having such menacingly realistic dreams caused by stress or outside forces, something none of us could understand. It got to the point, teddy bear, something generally comforting to aid her in sleep. But she was 7, not some 4-year-old who couldn't for the life of them understand what was going on. She knew that the dreams always started and ended the same, and that she couldn't find comfort in much that would lessen the terror caused by such. She always said the same thing. A lady who stood over her bedside, hair too long and straggly, smile too wide, eyes too large. And she would whisper that she was going to steal Amy's body. My sister would shake and scream until she woke herself. She said that she knew that one day the woman would succeed. We just saw them as all too realistic dreams. One night my sister woke from a severely horrible nightmare of sleep paralysis, and she wandered into my room, where she tugged on my shirt to wake me. Seeing her in the pitch black dark hadn't crawled into with me in my bed. I was a little unsure, being a teenager and wondering if this was weird or not. But she was my little sister, so I sucked it up. She smiled and said, "Good. You're my older brother, so you protect me. They keep trying to tell me to keep things that give me comfort in my room." I slept there for a couple of nights before her constant thrashing around and waking in bed had been enough. And then I started a routine of reading her stories until she fell asleep. I then crawled out of her bed and started sleeping on the floor. My parents would sometimes walk in and check on us, and thought it was the sweetest thing that their teenage son was sleeping on the floor watching over his sister. Meanwhile, I woke up with a feeling of a broken back every single morning. Told me that she was still sleeping. I tried to get things under control, but as I stood to my feet and came near her bed, she started waving her arms around as if controlled by some otherworldly thing, and yelled, "Don't! Don't!" I knew that she was struggling with whatever was haunting her dreams, so I met her by the bedside and woke the sleeper, something you're never supposed to do. She woke up in an instant, with tears streaming down her face, and then she fucking punched me. I mean, with adrenaline-induced inhuman strength for the little girl that was my sister. She was a menace. And then she snapped out of it. I stared at her from my fallen position on the floor. "I don't know what happened," she cried. "I'm so sorry. Don't leave me here in my room. Please don't be mad." And well, I was there the next night, clear as day. I resumed my spot on the floor after she was peacefully snoring in bed. This time, it was only after about 20 minutes of her sleeping that she woke up. For lack of a better term, woke and started screaming. My sister was absolutely terrified. Her blanket flew off the bed and covered me on the floor. I crawled out from under, struggling to regain my balance as I stood. Standing at the end of the bed, my sister stared at me with wide eyes and screaming, "Come, come." So I listened to her. When I did, she knocked me to the floor and woke up, and the entire fiasco had repeated itself just like the night before. By this point, I was kind of getting scared by these night terrors. Something as simple as sleep paralysis giving my sister this strength, like something was inside her, controlling her, giving her the strength to harm her brother, the person she thought could save her from this. Third night in a row, the blanket hit, and I tried a new approach. Her eyes burst open, and she was screaming, attempting to swat at something imaginary in front of her. I called out from under, sneaking a peek at the bed. Her eyes pointed to the left of her bed, where they always were, searching for me or something. I steadily walked to the other side, but before I even got there, her head snapped in my direction, and she screamed, "Closer." I walked closer as we met eyes, and I was about to wake her from her slumber when her sweaty grip held onto my shirt, and I trembled in front of her. "I'm awake." She then threw me to the floor. I scurried backward on my legs, and my sister bolted from the bed with adrenaline pumping her to the exit of the room. She grabbed my hand on the way out and slammed the door behind us. "What the fuck?" I yelled at my sister. Our parents were now waking up and crawling out of bed. I felt instantly bad that I had cursed in her face, but she was scaring the crap out of me, and I was utterly confused by what just happened. "I woke up in the middle of this dream," she said. "I've been warning you for a couple of nights. Don't come closer." "What?" I asked, shaking my head. I pieced together all the things my sister had been saying to me over the past few nights, how she had thrown me to the floor. I told her about the crazy things that she'd been doing, without even knowing it. "Well, this time I woke up," she started, tears pouring down her face, voice turning into a whisper as our parents came into the hallway. "The lady that stands over my bed tried to grab a hold of you. I saw her trying to climb into your mouth when it was hanging open. Don't come closer." The pushing. My sister had been trying to save my life from whatever hell lived in that room. The distinct feeling of something in my mouth came to light, and I reached a finger behind one of my front teeth, only to pull out a fingernail. I want to say up front, for the record, that I have zero belief in the paranormal, and I believe all of what I'm about to tell you is simply a product of the amazing human brain. That said, I realize that others will think differently and appreciate this story, and it doesn't mean this whole thing hasn't ever creeped me out. It did, and still does. Anyway, I work overnight at a funeral home. Basically, I babysit the place by myself all night. If someone croaks in the night, I'm there to answer the phones and dispatch someone for the body. I clean up a little and get a few things ready for the funerals the next day. Not the most glamorous job, but the job market sucks right now. And even with my few duties, I end up with hours to kill every night. I'm technically not supposed to sleep on the job. That said, I sometimes do. I'll nod off at the desk, or sometimes I'll go lay down on one of the couches and take a power nap. I'm alone all night, other than the handful of bodies in different rooms, and it's boring. I think most people would do the same. The weird thing is, sleep paralysis is pretty common for me when I fall asleep at work. Although there have been very few times when someone has shown up at the funeral home in the middle of the night, unannounced, I'm always fearful that one of the directors will show up unexpectedly and catch me sleeping. I believe this fear causes me to sleep lightly and to have sleep paralysis, because I rarely have it at home. Now, for those of you who have never had sleep paralysis, basically it's like this. Your eyes are open, and you're seeing your surroundings, but you're not actually awake. So sometimes, you can still see or hear dream things, like maybe you see something that isn't there, or whatever, and you can't move. It feels as though you're being held down and you can't wake up. It feels as if you're straining against something when you try. As for myself, I usually can snap myself out of it and wake up if I strain and thrash against it hard enough. And then I finally wake up and am able to move. Google it if you want more information about it. It's pretty interesting. Now on with the weirdness that began to happen when I would slip into sleep paralysis during a nap. The first was the music. Sometimes I would find myself lying there with my eyes wide open in sleep paralysis, and I would begin to hear music, loudly and vividly. It was almost always Christian gospel music, but modern stuff like you would hear on the radio. It always sounded like it was coming from inside my skull, particularly in my mouth area. This sounds stupid, but at one point, I was beginning to wonder if I was picking up some AM Christian station in my feelings and was only sensitive enough to hear it while I was asleep, or maybe when my mouth was hanging open and dried out. I even went as far as to remember one of the lyrics from the songs and Google it when I woke up, although it didn't appear to be a real song. Sorry, I can't remember the lyric anymore. This was months and months ago. Then the weirder things started happening. Sometimes I would fall into sleep paralysis. I would think I heard someone walking toward me from one of the hallways. Fearing that an employee had shown up unsuspectedly, I would always frantically strain against the sleep paralysis and wake up. At which point, the sounds of the footsteps were gone. After that, I would always feel foolish for getting tricked by some dream sounds. This went on for months and months, the music and the footsteps. Always when I heard the footsteps, I would have to err on the side of caution and force myself awake in case it really was another employee, only to be annoyed at having gone through the effort for nothing and having ruined a perfectly good nap. One night, I was really tired and napping on the couch. I slipped into this state and I heard the footsteps. I decided, screw it. I wasn't going to get tricked by my sleep paralysis for the millionth time. So I just laid there, expecting that I would either eventually wake up normally without the strain, or I would go back to full sleep, or the footsteps would continue the way the music always did, if I just laid there stuck in that state. But to my complete surprise, the footstepper showed himself. I was laying on my back, stretched out. A man came walking up from the direction of my head, coming into my field of view and stopping directly next to me. There was nothing memorable about him, just a white male in some kind of dress shirt and slacks, except for one thing. His face and head were obscured, more like blurred out, just like they do on the news for anonymous witnesses or whatever. His face and head were obviously there, but I could see nothing but a smeary blur. Then to my horror, he reached out and poked me lightly in the forehead and let out a kind of sinister chuckle. Sinister is probably the wrong word. It was more like he was laughing as if to say, yeah, Feel real brave now, don't you? And at that point, of course, I snapped myself awake and found myself alone, as always. It was very disturbing, of course, to say the least. Probably not as much for most, though, to be honest, because I truly have no belief in ghosts or the paranormal and chalked it up to my brain tricks. But since then, it's happened twice more. The second time I saw someone, I found myself with my eyes open, staring at, I shit you not, a woman wearing a rubber clown mask and holding a gun at her side, just staring at me passively. Thankfully, I knew right away that it was just my sleep paralysis, and I didn't panic, but I was unnerved enough to force myself awake and cause the woman to vanish. The third time was similar to the first. I was laying on the couch, and this time, a small child approached me from behind. I think it was a boy, but I can't say for sure. Probably about 6 or 7, and his face was also blurred in the same way the man's had been. He giggled once in amusement, and I was immediately scared to the point that I forced myself awake. Of all the times that this has happened, that was by far the most disturbing. And that's it. That's my story. Sorry it doesn't have a better resolution, but this is all true, and I don't believe that there's anything paranormal going on here. But it's fucking freaky, no? Hey guys, Unit 522 here, and I want to thank you very much for watching my video. I would appreciate it very much if you would share, like, and comment. And if you're new to this channel, become one with the Unity by hitting the subscribe button. If you have a scary story or experience that you want featured on this channel, you can always send it to my email or post it on the Free Horror Stories subreddit. The links for those can be found in the description below. If you would like to help out this channel even more, consider a PayPal donation. And for more updates, be sure to follow me on Twitter. There's nothing wrong with a little darkness in your life, as long as you never forget, there's always a reason to be afraid. Number 3. Just a few days ago, my friends and I came across an old insane asylum. We sat outside for a while drinking a few beers. As we sat against the fence, a friend of mine named Chris was telling us about a story about a man who brutally murdered his wife and claimed that a demonic being named Hassan had done it and framed him for the murder. This man's name was Gregory Stone, and he was put into the asylum back in 1978. Despite the rumors of it being haunted and the no trespassing sign that sat against the fence, we went inside anyway. We were all wandering through the building together until I separated myself from the other guys. I know I probably should have stayed with them, but I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, so I figured that I would be fine exploring by myself. I found a room that had a bunch of old things. There was a desk with a chair still in place. There were cabinets, each with a single letter stuck to them. It must have been somebody's office or something. There was an envelope on an old desk that was labeled the Harley case. The whole purpose of us wandering through the asylum was to find something interesting enough to take back home and prove to everyone that we were man enough to enter the asylum. I opened the envelope and pulled out a cassette tape and a stack of papers. One of them had a drawing. The drawing was some creepy man-looking thing, dated July 12th, 1978. I noticed an old tape recorder that sat near the edge of the desk. I picked it up, surprised that it still worked. I dusted it off and put in the tape, which was labeled Stone Session. The sound wasn't great, but I was able to make out the words without any problems.
How are you today?
I'm miraculous, Dr. Norman.
That's great. Now, let's get started. Do you recall who Harley Stone is?
Why, yes, Dr. Norman. She's Greg's wife.
Do you know what happened to Harley?
She was murdered, Doctor.
Do you know who murdered her?
Sure I do. It was Hassan.
Are you sure it was Hassan? Why would Hassan want to hurt Harley?
Hassan didn't like Harley, Dr. Norman. He always talked about either ripping her head off or blowing her brains out.
Well, why didn't you tell anybody?
Because he said he'd kill me if I did. He said he'd kill everybody.
There was 8 minutes of complete silence here for some reason.
Do you know your name?
Of course I do.
Can you tell me your name?
Marie.
Can you tell me about Hassan?
I don't like talking about Hassan.
Please. It would really help me out.
Well, only since you're cute. He's a very bad man, Dr. Norman. He's not human. He's a demon.
What does he look like?
He's really creepy, Dr. Norman. He has long dark hair. He has scars on his face and his eyes are black. If you stare into them, you'd see your worst fears and they'll all come true. That's what scares me the most about him.
Is he here now?
He's always here, Dr. Norman. He's always watching.
Where is he? Why can't I see him?
He's right over there. He's watching you, Dr. Norman. Not everybody sees him, but he's always there. Always watching.
Can you talk to him? Well, can you ask him why he's so angry? Why he killed Harley?
That's a bad word, Hassan. You should never say that.
What did he say?
He said that Harley was a bitch, and that she had it coming for an awful long time.
There was a few minutes of silence here.
What are you drawing, Dr. Norman?
I'm writing some important information down.
What kind of important information?
It's confidential.
Well, can I draw?
Only if you tell me everything I want to know.
It's a deal, Dr. Norman.
Did you murder Harley?
Of course not. She was my best friend.
Well, Victor told me yesterday that you and Gregory were having an affair. Is that true?
Excuse my language, Doctor, but Victor is a piece of shit.
So, it isn't true then?
Maybe there was one time, but that doesn't mean anything.
So, you didn't murder Harley out of pure jealousy?
I would never. It was Hassan. I saw him.
There's no need to cry. I believe you. Now, do you know where you are?
I'm at home. I'm always at home.
You're not at home anymore. You haven't been home in weeks.
If I'm not at home, then where am I?
You're in a psychiatric institution.
Why am I here? I don't belong here.
You're here because you have problems that you...
Done. Do you want to see my drawing?
I'd love to.
Do you like it?
It's wonderful. What is it?
It's Hassan. What he really, really looks like.
Well, I guess you weren't lying when you said he was creepy.
I'm going to put his name on it, so that now everybody knows what he looks like. And that I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, am I, Dr. Norman?
I think it's time to speak to Victor. Is that okay with you?
I guess so.
The tape then cut to a conversation with Dr. Norman and Victor.
How are you today, Victor?
What's it to you, Doc?
Is something bothering you?
What ain't bothering me? This place is a living hell. It smells like piss. The people here are fucking strange, and I just want to go home, you know?
Do you know why you're here?
We're all here because of that piece of shit Hassan. You know he came to me and asked me to whack that chick.
What did you tell him?
I told him I was done with that type of work. I've been out of that business for a long time.
Answer me this question, and I want an honest answer. Do you think you belong here?
Hell no. Listen, I ain't no crazy person, Doc. I may have a few bodies myself, but that came with the business. I did everything boss told me to do.
What business do you speak of?
You know. I was a part of a certain family. I was a mobster, a gangster, a damn good one too.
No, you weren't.
Pardon me?
You were never part of any gang or mob in your life. You haven't killed a single person. You were a car salesman, and you belong here, Victor. Just as much as everybody else here.
Let me tell you a story, Doc. And this is how I know you're bullshitting me. There was a friend of mine back in 1922. He was a chatterbox, never would shut up about anything. You know what I did to him? You know how I got him to shut up?
What did you do?
Beyond anima.
I'm sorry, but I'm not familiar with that word.
It means I fucking killed him. I put a bullet in his head and I threw him in a ditch. I picked up his fucking brains and I fed him to my dog. That's how I know you're fucking bullshitting me, Doc. If you want proof, I can show you to his rotting corpse because I'm sure it's still down there.
Do you want to know why you belong here, Victor?
I will love to know, Doc. And this better be good because I don't like my time being wasted.
You were born in 1941. May 22nd, 1941.
Did you need something, Doctor?
I ain't no crazy person, you hear? I know when I was born. You can't bullshit me.
Show Mr. Stone to his cell. We'll continue the session in an hour or two.
I'll rip your fucking head off. I ain't no crazy person. I worked with Al Capone.
You could hear Victor screaming all the way down to his cell as it echoed through the recorder. The tape then stopped, as that was the end of side A. It lasted over 30 minutes, and I was so hooked on listening to the tape that I guess I didn't even hear my friends calling out for me. I got a text from one of them saying that they had already left the building. For some reason, I thought I was back home. I texted back and said I was fine and flipped the tape around to side B.
How are you feeling, Mr. Stone?
I'm stuck in a mental institution and everybody thinks I killed my wife. How do you think I feel?
Well, if you didn't do it, who did?
I already told you who did it. It was Hassan.
Tell me more about Hassan.
I've already told you enough.
What is your relationship with Hassan?
We were friends up until he killed my wife.
Can you be honest with me? Is Hassan really real? Did you make him up?
Why the fuck will I make him up? I'm a 37-year-old man.
Why can't anyone else see him?
I'm not the only one. Stephen sees him too. As does Victor.
Who's Stephen? I've never met Stephen before.
He's a friend of mine.
Can I speak to him?
What the fuck for?
Never mind then. Let's talk about your mother. Do you know where she is right now?
She's in hospital.
Do you know why she's in the hospital?
Because somebody tried to kill her.
Do you know who tried to kill her?
If I had to guess, it was Hassan.
Why would Hassan want to kill your mother?
The same reason he killed my wife, if I had to guess.
Are you sure he killed your wife?
I'm done talking about my wife.
Are you sure he killed your wife? Think about it, Mr. Stone.
I said I'm done talking about my wife, Doctor.
Do you want some more time in the White Room?
Fuck you.
You can make this easier for yourself, Greg. All you have to do is remember.
Remember what?
You have a problem, Greg. I just want to help you with it. Now, I've been playing along with you for too long. It's time for you to remember.
What the hell are you talking about?
Sit back in your chair, close your eyes, and just take a deep breath. Try to remember.
What am I supposed to remember? What the hell is going on here?
Just keep your eyes closed, Greg.
I don't feel right. What the hell is going on?
It's just a simple pill to help you gain control of your mind. You've been losing yourself, Greg. You're slipping away, and everyone who loves you is worried about you.
Everybody like who? Harley? Where the hell is my wife?
Calm down, Greg. Your wife is dead, remember?
She isn't dead. She's talking to me right now. She's always talking to me. She never shuts up.
What is she saying?
She says that you're trying to kill her. If you touch my wife, I swear to holy God, I will fucking kill you.
Just keep quiet, Greg, and close your eyes. Let your mind relax.
There was about 5 minutes of silence.
Greg? Open your eyes, Mr. Stone. Now, who killed your wife?
My wife ain't dead, Doc.
Victor? Am I speaking to Victor?
Ain't nobody else in the room, Doc, except for Hassan, but... Oh, that's right. You can't see him.
I wasn't done speaking to Greg. May I speak to him, please?
Greg is asleep, Doc. It's only me now.
Do you remember our last conversation, Victor?
You mean when you try to convince me that I'm a crazy person? How could I forget?
You told me that Hassan killed Greg's wife. Are you sure about that?
What the fuck do you mean, am I sure? I saw him kill her. I saw him chop her up into pieces. I saw the blood pour out of her head as he chopped it off. We all saw him do it, Doc.
Who is we?
The people I live with, Doc. That annoying bitch Marie, Greg, and Steven.
What if I told you Hassan isn't real?
You're always trying to bullshit me, Doc. It ain't gonna happen. I see Hassan. He's looking right at you, and he doesn't like what you're saying.
What exactly is he doing?
He has a knife, Doc. And he's itching closer. He's gonna rip your fucking head off, Doc.
Calm down now, Victor. You don't want time in the White Room, do you?
You know something, Doc? You're a real piece of shit. You go around and you tell people that they're crazy when really, you're the only one who can see them. Now let that sink in, Doc.
Tell me this, Greg. Why won't you remember?
You just called me Greg. My name isn't Greg.
Oh, I'm sorry, Victor. Can you tell me about Steven?
Steven is a bit on the weird side. He doesn't talk much.
Can I speak to him?
He isn't here right now. He's never here. He's probably out walking the streets like the crazy fucking drunk he is. If anybody belongs here, Doc, it's him. Even if he was here, he wouldn't speak to you. He don't speak to anybody.
How's your wife, Victor?
She's great. Hey, you want to hear the story of how we met?
I'd love to.
It was back in 1922 after I threw that fuck in the ditch. She was a friend of a friend, and he introduced me to her. I'm telling you, Doc, she couldn't keep her eyes off me. I met her again the next day, and again after that. Eventually, we were inseparable. If that ain't love, Doc, then I don't know what is.
That's a beautiful story, Victor.
You're damn right it is. She's the reason why I got out of that business. She was so scared that one day I'd end up in a ditch with bullet holes all in my body. I wasn't having that, Doc. I got out of that business real quick.
Well, it's getting late, and the session is almost over. Can you do something for me, Victor?
It depends.
Can you sit back in your chair and close your eyes?
What the hell for?
Just an experiment. Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Try to remember.
Remember what? I ain't no lab rat, Doc.
All you have to do is lay back, close your eyes, and relax. I promise nothing will happen to you.
5 minutes of silence.
Victor? Greg? You can open your eyes now. Mr. Stone, who killed your wife?
What?
Your wife, Greg. Who killed her?
I don't have a wife. I never did.
That's great, Greg. You're showing some progress. Now, tell me why you're here.
Because I suffer from a personality disorder and I almost killed my mother.
Do you know the names of your other personalities?
Well, there's Marie, Stephen, Victor, and Harley.
That's good. Now, who is Hassan?
He's that creepy fucking guy over there.
Okay. I think we're done with today's session. Johnny here will show you to your room. That concludes session 4 of mental patient Gregory Stone, who suffers from dissociative identity disorder. The next session will occur on another date, which is to be determined.
The tape then stopped. I was confused afterwards because I recalled my friend Chris telling me that he was put into the asylum for murdering his wife and blaming it on a demon named Hassan. But apparently his wife never existed. I don't know about Hassan though. Maybe Gregory Stone was really dealing with evil spirits, or maybe he was just another person losing control of his mind. I don't know what really happened in that asylum, but I do know that I will never walk in there again. I grabbed the tape and the drawing and left the room. As I walked out, I had this creepy, unsettling feeling that something was just behind me, something watching me. Number 2. Last year, a friend of mine was getting a small business set up doing ghost walks of an abandoned Victorian mental asylum called Cane Hill. The amount of legalities involved caused it to be a long-winded process that sadly never came to fruition. Perhaps this was for the best. Due to the state of the building, only certain parts could be used for his planned ghost walk. Fire set by the locals had destroyed some parts, and other parts were unsafe structurally, which was a shame, as some really interesting areas were off limits. However, some of the wards and patient rooms were very much fine, albeit overgrown and in some state of disrepair. I've never been one for the paranormal, and the hospital didn't really freak me out. Ironically, my friend, the Ghost Walk tour guide, was creeped out by the place and wouldn't go there alone. I was admittedly taking the piss out of him a lot for it. Basically, every time we went there, I would make him jump or freak out, pretend to be possessed, or tell him that I could hear voices, etc. One evening, I got him worse than I had ever done before. I hid underneath a bed just as he turned his back. He genuinely thought something had spirited me away and near enough wet himself. When I revealed myself, I felt kind of bad, as he was in tears. He then challenged me to spend a few hours that evening in the hospital alone, betting that I couldn't. I accepted. I am terrible for betting. I got to about 6 p.m. and it was rapidly getting dark, and Tom, my friend, was leaving.
I'm trying to shit your pants too much tonight, gay boy,
he said before getting into his car. Yeah, bye. Try not to shit your pants at every little noise you hear, I replied. He smirked as he drove off. Made my way back inside. I had a near fully charged phone with me. Good signal for both calls and internet, so I was relatively happy. It got to about 8 p.m., and it had been quiet when I heard a voice.
Hello?
From somewhere in the room. Admittedly, I near enough shat myself. I froze in place.
Hello?
It croaked again. Hello? I replied.
What are you doing here?
It said. The voice contained a hint of a threat. I was still pretty much shitting myself, and then I noticed it. A small intercom panel on the wall, opposite to me, above head level, but in the direction the voice was coming from. That fucker, I thought to myself. I was impressed. Tom was clearly testing this out for his tours. I thought I'd play along, no doubt. He had invented some insane character to freak me out with. In all fairness, he was trying to develop a genuine experience for his business, and I wanted him to succeed. Me and Tom began conversing. He told me how he had recently raided a house and kidnapped the entire family and brought them into the asylum to operate on them. I then heard another voice, a woman. She sounded scared and was begging for mercy. I genuinely was unsettled. Tom had outdone himself and gone as far as to hire voice actors. Then the operations began. The man gave a gruesome, detailed account of what he was doing to each family member. His account was broken by their screams and cries for help. It was only when he started talking about defiling the corpse of a child that I told him to just stop. It was too much for me, and people wouldn't want to hear that. He went silent and didn't say another word. I tried talking to him a couple of times, but got nothing. I think I hurt Tom's feelings. I could tell he had tried hard with the character, and necrophilia aside, he had done a good job. Morning came around and I found myself waking up, not realizing I had drifted off. What woke me was the sound of a car approaching. I made my way out front to find Tom there, his arms crossed with a skeptical look on his face. He asked me if I had a scary time. "Oh, terrifying, you crazy bastard," I responded. He gave me a funny smile and went inside the ward. "Oh, as good as you were," I started. "I spotted your intercom straight away. You might want to try actually hiding it when you're guiding people around."
Intercom? What the fuck are you on about? Were you on drugs last night?
Don't play stupid with me, Tom. You're a psycho character that talked to me all night through that intercom there, I said, pointing. Tom walked over to it and examined it up close.
Mate, this is a vent into the next room.
Number 1. Last week, I had the privilege to talk to a recently released insane asylum patient. He was taken in Iowa and was held for a year until finally being released after being proved sane. I interviewed him recently to get more information for the paper company I work for. This is his story. I was taken in last year for suspicion of murdering my wife and mother. During my court trial, my lawyer pleaded insanity. I didn't really have a say in the matter. The judge granted it, and I was on my way. I arrived on November 17th, 2013. I was driven to this asylum and placed in a small isolated room with a small window. That was the only light I received for weeks. I longed for release, wishing to be let free. After weeks, the guards noticed that I was one of the more obedient inmates. I was inmate number 216. and soon became respected among the guards with my overflowing knowledge. I read my days away in the small but resourceful library, a privilege I earned over time, and was accompanied by a guard who would often engage in small talk. I was almost happy for a man in an asylum. Everything was all right until the construction began across the street, and I noticed it one morning as I awoke and peered out my cubby-like window. I saw a man with a crew drilling into the ground with their jackhammers. I was intrigued when I first encountered the sight with my eyes, and my mind constantly wondered what they could be building. That day, I skipped my reading session and simply watched the men drill all day. I slept with a smile on my face, dreaming of the possibilities. They constantly drilled, day in and day out, until the sound was almost sickening. I prayed for them to stop, but they never did. 76 days they drilled. I remember asking myself how deep could they possibly need their hole to be. 76 days, I didn't attend my reading sessions. Guards came to check in on me and fed me, guards which I lashed out upon. I began talking to myself, mimicking the drilling sounds. Sometimes, even in my sleep, I was soon feared among the guards, and they checked on me less and less, until they stopped altogether. I was nearly starved to death, until my old reading acquaintance stopped by. I could tell he feared me as he quickly dropped off the food, and was about to scurry away, until I muttered 2 words, "Thank you." It was a whisper, but he heard me and smiled, exiting casually. The next few weeks were different. I was fed and began to read once more. I engaged the guard in small talk once again, and we shared laughs. Things were looking better, and on the date of November 24th, 2014, I was released after being proved mentally competent. I encountered a variety of tests and had to undergo therapy before I was released. The construction was completed and resulted in a small urgent care center. I am now a respectful citizen and am working a job. I have truly turned my life around. The man's story really inspired me, and we talked for a little while after the interview ended. Through our talk, we came across a question that made me uncomfortable and scared. I asked him what he would consider to be his greatest achievement while in the asylum. He answered without a stutter and stared into my eyes. He almost had a sly smile on his face, convincing the guards I was a sane man. Hey guys, Unit 522 here. I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Creepin Von Pasta, Mr. Sinister, Belladonna Black, and Frybro for their outstanding performances in this collaboration. The links to their channels can be found in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and be sure to share, like, and comment. Hit that subscribe button if you're new, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter. And also, never forget, there's always a reason to be afraid. Hey, what's up guys? Unit 522 here. Before we begin, I want to give a special thank you and a shout out to my good friend Wormy Horror for joining me in this video. Me and Wormy go way back to when I first started narrating stories, and I don't think I would be where I am today if it wasn't for him. So after the video is done, be sure to head over to his channel and check it out. A link will be below in the description and at the end of this video. Enjoy. Number 3. This happened many years ago when I was in my early 20s, working in a nursing home. The home cared for a maximum of 60 residents, 30 on the ground floor and 30 on the second floor. The home is laid out with entranceways at either end of the building. 15 rooms, the day room, followed by another 15 rooms. Ending the room corridors are the nurse stations. The dementia unit was on the second level. On the night when this incident happened, I was working the night shift. We normally would have 3 staff to a floor, but on this night, we were understaffed. It was just myself and another nursing assistant that was in the dementia unit. I was in the east section nurses station, and they were on the west section. I was using the space and quiet time to get some paperwork done. I had my nose buried in my work. The ward is pretty quiet at night, so it's the best time to concentrate on these sort of tasks. About halfway through my shift, around 3 a.m., I look up from my desk, and I was startled. Staring back at me from the other side of the counter was Mrs. Taylor, one of the dementia residents on the East Wing. But the reason I was so taken aback on this occasion was that Mrs. Taylor, not only frail and elderly, but she also had bad hips, and walking without staff assistance is not her strong suit. However, I regained my composure and asked her, "What's wrong?" There was no response from her. Mrs. Taylor is not much of a talker at the best of times, but being asked direct questions usually gets a response. "Mrs. Taylor, is everything okay?" No response. "Let's get you back into your room, yeah?" No response. I began to feel a little uneasy as she was staring right at me, almost right through me, with no expression on her face. Walking around from behind the desk at the nurse's station, I placed my hand on her arm to guide her back down the corridor to her room. She was ice cold. It was in the middle of the winter, but even so, she had an abnormal body temperature. No words were spoken from her, despite me asking her a few random questions in the short walk back to her room. As we approached the room, I let go of Mrs. Taylor's arm and opened the bedroom door. Before turning back around to help guide her back to her bed, I was frozen in shock. My skin broke out with goosebumps as there, lying in bed, was Mrs. Taylor. I didn't want to turn back around to see if there was anyone standing behind me. Without getting the chance to think this over, I noticed something seriously wrong, and my training kicked in. I approached the bed and found no pulse. The doctor on duty was called to the unit. That was my last shift at the nursing home, and this night has played out in my mind over and over ever since. Number 2.
When I was about 2 or 3, my parents moved into an old farmhouse that was just over a century old. The house had a good-sized backyard, which was great for playing in. I would often sit in the yard with my little bucket and shovel, pretending to look for dinosaur bones or other such treasures. One day, when I was around 4, I looked up from my digging to see a pretty lady in a worn blue dress standing about a yard away. Being a naive child, I figured this lady was a friendly neighbor and asked if she wanted to play with me. Though she did not answer me, the woman solemnly pointed to a spot on the ground 3 feet to my left. Figuring this to be some sort of new game, I moved to that spot and began to dig. Month after month, the lady would periodically visit me and we would play our game, with me digging holes all around the yard. After about 5 months of her appearing to me, the lady pointed out a spot near the old well in our yard. The stone structure had been around as long as the farmhouse and had been boarded long before my parents bought the place. Approaching the well, I knelt in the spot the woman had pointed to, just a handful of steps away. Like all the other times, I began to dig with my little plastic shovel. I was a determined little kid, and so was unperturbed when the dirt began to pile up. About 2 feet down, a stark white object began to appear. Excited that I was finally about to unearth that dinosaur bone I had long been searching for, I began to dig even faster. Soon, a pile of white was revealed, and I wasted little time in pulling out one of the small lightweight objects. Turning with a smile to show my finding to my friend in the blue dress, I was disappointed to see she had left again. My disappointment was short-lived, however, as my mother took that moment to exit the house, no doubt coming to call me in for lunch. With my prize in hand, I rushed over to my mother and proudly showed her the white bone. "Look, Ma, I found a dinosaur," I shouted at her. Her face went from smiling to sporting a horrified expression in a matter of seconds. She let out a scream and knocked the object from my hand, pulling me quickly inside the house. I guess someone must have called the police, because men in uniform soon came to rope off the backyard. For the longest time, I never knew what all the fuss was about and why the police officers had to take my dinosaur bones away. Immediately after that incident, my family moved to a new house in the middle of nowhere, a couple of states away, and the event was eventually forgotten in my mind. It wasn't until later in life when I stumbled across an article on the house that I truly understood the events of that day. The article stated that the house had been converted into a restaurant, and that the establishment was known to be haunted by a ghost named Elizabeth. Apparently, the original owners of the farmhouse were a sailor named Daniel and his young wife Elizabeth. Historical accounts say that Daniel went to sea on a voyage that was to last several months. As 3 months passed, then 4, then 5, Elizabeth began to become lonelier and lonelier. Sure that her husband had died at sea, Elizabeth gave in to her loneliness and had an affair with a young farmer that lived nearby. Just over a year and a half since he'd left, Daniel returned home from his extended voyage to find Elizabeth had had a child. Knowing the child couldn't possibly be his, Daniel went into a murderous rage. Fearing for her life and the life of her child, Elizabeth tried to flee, but only managed to make it as far as the well in the backyard. Ripping the child from her arms, Daniel roughly flung the babe to the ground, immediately silencing its cries. Elizabeth fared a little better, and found herself backed up against a stone well. Daniel yelled and cursed at his unfaithful wife. Whether intentionally or not, Daniel roughly shoved Elizabeth, causing her to fall backwards into the dark depths of the well, where she met her watery end. Afraid of being convicted of murder, Daniel dug a shallow grave for the child and boarded up the well. According to the restaurant workers, Elizabeth, to this day, still roams the grounds looking for her baby. Having read that article, I broke out in a cold sweat with the realization that those dinosaur bones I had once dug up were probably, in reality, the bones of that poor, murdered child. And that woman who was my playmate, looking back, I realize now that her dress was a little too worn and her face a little too pale. But I don't know why. If I found her child that day, Elizabeth still wanders around. Perhaps it is because the police still have those bones in evidence, locked up far away from its mother. Or perhaps it's because the bones do not belong to Elizabeth's baby. Did I mention I had a younger sister that went missing?
Number 1. I would like to share with you one of the creepier haunted house stories I've experienced growing up. Everything said here is very real and burned into my memory forever. I will never forget that touch. It all began when I was 6. My family was going through some hard financial times, and in turn, we moved into my great-grandmother's farmhouse. This house was from the 1800s, 1862 to be more specific. The farmhouse was large, 2 stories, and we lived on the 2nd floor, above the kitchen and the dining room. At first, there was nothing more creepier than the well in the basement, and the secret passages throughout the whole house that connected various parts to one another. You could start in the woodshed, which was located between the back of the house and the barn, and you would end up in the attic 2 stories above by using these stairways. The layout of the house is relevant to the story. The main staircase to the 2nd floor is accessible through the living room. Once at the top of those stairs, there's a bedroom to your right and left, and a bathroom that sits at the beginning of a hallway on the right-hand side back corner. My room was down that hallway, and through the back of my bedroom was a door that led to my parents' room, so I was essentially sandwiched in this farmhouse. My cousin, who we'll call Ethel, lived with my aunt in the bedroom at the top of the stairs that was to the left, and my great-grandmother was to the right. And of course, my parents were beyond my bedroom, with the door closed. It was the morning of my 7th birthday, a cold day in October. I was lying in bed, wishing someone would get up so we could begin the day. As I laid there, probably no earlier than 6 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door in the hallway. Someone's awake, I thought. My cousin was also excited for the birthday to begin. I quickly closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. The footsteps came down the hallway and stopped right outside my door. I heard the latch flip up and the door drag across the wooden floor as it opened. I could sense someone standing by my bed, which was against the wall on the left as soon as you entered the room. What persuaded me to keep my eyes closed, I will never know, but to this day, I cringe when I think of what I might have seen had I opened them. I still figured that this was my cousin trying to surprise me for my birthday, so I lied still, pretending to be asleep. I felt the bed compress next to me as someone sat down on my mattress and stared at me. I could feel the thing's eyes on my face, but I kept my eyes closed. I mean, what was my cousin going to do on my birthday? Scare me? This is where things get weird. I felt the bed shift like someone is trying to settle in and get more comfortable. I then begin to realize that my cousin is not just sitting next to me, but is leaning over me. I can tell she's close because I can feel her weight hovering over me. I kept my eyes closed, realizing now that I couldn't open them, even if I wanted to. Then I felt a hand over my eyes and nose, pinching my nostrils shut, making it so I could not breathe or see anything. It takes me a minute to realize what's going on. I thought to myself, why is my cousin trying to suffocate me? I laid there confused and scared to move, wondering what was going on. And then, it's over. I feel the hands removed from my face and the weight released from my bed, springing it back into shape. I do not hear anyone leave or the door open again. I open my eyes, staring up at the eaves, trying to figure out what's happening. Why would my cousin come in and play that kind of trick on me on my birthday? I look around, listening, realizing that the house is completely silent. No footsteps from my grandmother, no purring cats wandering the halls, and the snores of my family permeating around me. I flip back the covers and sit on the edge of my bed, feeling my face. It feels hot and prickly, like pins and needles. Peered into the bedroom that she shares with my aunt, and there she is, lying peacefully in bed. My aunt is snowing my revenge for the evil trick that she just played in my bedroom. Except as I get closer, it occurs to me that Ethel is also in a very deep sleep, not just lying there like I was, pretending so that she could trick me. I feel my whole world come crashing down around me. If Ethel is right here, deeply in slumber, then who just came into my room? Who put their hands on my face? Who held my eyes, my nose, and my mouth completely shut? I feel my heart start to race and skip a beat out of complete shock and terror. I check the rest of my family to assure they're all sound and asleep, and then I return to my bedroom. This was not the first time I had heard footsteps in the hallway. My grandmother often got up in the middle of the night to double-check the farmhouse, but there were thoughts racing through my mind as I laid back in bed and tried to collect myself. What if those footsteps were not always my grandmother's? What if the wandering in and out of rooms throughout the night were not my family checking to make sure that we were sleeping soundly? I began to become more aware of my surroundings after this. It took me years to tell this story to anyone in my family for fear of sounding crazy. When I told my mother years later, I was shocked to hear that she also had experiences growing up there, but she never told me about any malicious ghosts. This was just the beginning of my interaction with the paranormal. It has continued throughout my entire life. Hey guys, Unit 522 here, and I want to thank you very much for watching my video. I would appreciate it very much if you would share, like, and comment. And if you're new to this channel, become one with the Unity by hitting the subscribe button. If you have a scary story or experience that you want featured on this channel, you can always send it to my email or post it on the Free Horror Stories subreddit. The links for those can be found in the description below. If you would like to help out this channel even more, consider a PayPal donation. And for more updates, be sure to follow me on Twitter. There's nothing wrong with a little darkness in your life, as long as you never forget there's always a reason to be afraid. Number 2. My friends and I had done a lot over the summer. Being in a small town, creativity can only go such a long way. We decided to turn to the internet, more specifically, the deep web. We browsed black markets for guns and drugs, for shits and giggles of course. We never actually purchased anything off of it. We wanted a more interactive experience, so we found an encrypted email website. My friend Jimmy was ecstatic, suggesting that we should use it for everyday communication. He then emailed my real email address saying that he had secret government documents. Needless to say, I marked it as spam, but it gave me an idea. My friend Matt and I originally bagged on the idea of using it, but I thought that I could still have some fun with this. I would download the Tor browser and find the email website. I would create an account and threaten my friend to get off the website. The username I used was simple, Firebrand, meaning someone wanting to change by any means necessary. The name Firebrand wasn't available by itself, so I added an 89 to trick Jimmy into believing that my alias was born in 1989. I then sent him an email. "This website isn't for kids. Leave now." I then sent him his own IP address to mess with him even more. To give me an alibi, I also sent an email to myself, telling me to tell him to get off the website. "If you don't make your friend Granola Bar Man get off this website, things will happen." Now Jimmy was absolutely terrified, so it was all going great. I had many ideas, but most of them would result in the police being called. He was going through a lot of stress, so I decided to tell him about it. On my way over to his house, I received a disturbing text from my mother. All it entailed was, 911, come home now. I turned the car around and sped home. As I pulled into the driveway, I quickly realized that my parents' cars were gone. I was starting to worry, and I tried calling my parents. My mom answered. She said everything was fine and that she had never sent that text. I hung up and checked my text messages again, and the message had disappeared. To calm my nerves, I decided to go inside my house and collect my thoughts. I step into the living room to find my laptop open on the table. I assumed that my parents had used it before they left. I sit down in front of it, and it was still on. The screen was just a window, a very simple Windows design. The title at the top left said, "From Firebrand 89. I couldn't click out of it or use Ctrl-Alt-Delete. All the window showed was a quote and a link.
If everyone minded their own business, the world would go around a great deal faster than it does."
I clicked on the link, and it showed an animation of a constant falling. It also played unnerving music that made me a little bit queasy and gave me a headache. The animation stopped and showed another quote.
"You would have to be half mad to dream me up."
After the quote faded off, 4 live video feeds appeared. One was from Jimmy's webcam, one from Matt's, and one from my laptop. The last one was just pitch black. I then heard a very sharp and different voice say,
"I know a lot about you, Braxton."
"Who are you?" I yelled. It then turned on its video feed. He wore a realistic-looking white rabbit mask and held a white rabbit in his hand.
"Curiouser and curiouser,"
he said. The mask then put on a creepy smirk. The mask must have been very top-notch because it actually formed a smile. It was absolutely terrifying. He then brutally murdered the defenseless creature. The screen went black, and another quote appeared.
Little Alice fell down the hole, bumped her head, and bruised her soul.
The laptop then restarted, and when it rebooted, everything was back to normal. The only difference was that all traces of Tor were completely gone, and Wonderland 1990 was installed. I turned off my laptop and raced to Jimmy's house to warn him of Firebrand 89. I arrived at his house and told him that it was me who had messaged him on the deep web. I then told him the rest that had just happened, and he didn't believe me. He was angry and thought I was just trying to scare him even more. He then kicked me out of his house. I don't exactly blame him. I returned home and started up to my room. I opened my door to find a laptop on my desk that wasn't mine. It had a cheap Logitech webcam on it, and on the keyboard was a photograph. The photograph showed me sitting on my couch, looking petrified at my laptop. The picture was not taken from the webcam feed, but from another place in my house. The back of the photo was another one of his quotes.
She had plenty of time as she went down to look about and wonder what was going to happen next. First she tried to look down and make out what she was coming to, but it was too dark to see anything.
I quickly ran downstairs into my living room to find where the photo had been taken from. Looking at the photo, I was able to find out that it was taken from my living room closet. I crept over to the closet with a knife in hand. I jolted the door open to find that it was empty, until I looked at the floor. On the floor lied a dead white rabbit. Number 1. The deep web is one of the most amazing things on Earth. Not because of how joyful it makes people or anything, but because it's a completely uncensored view of people. You can speak your mind, buy whatever you want, and do anything you want. When on the deep web, you have complete and total freedom. I had always been fascinated by the deep web, and at the time the events in the story occurred, I was in college. Lots of people at my campus had really been getting into accessing the deep web. It was almost like a trend. So with so many people getting on it, it seemed perfectly safe for me to give it a try. Now, I had always heard of the deep web horror stories. Stories of hacking, stumbling on disgusting sites, and people even somehow finding your address. These stories are what mainly kept me off the deep web. But with most people at my college using it on a normal basis, I decided to give it a go. I asked a friend to come over and help me set it up. When my friend arrived, we opened my laptop and began to set everything up. He told me that we were using Tor, a program that lets you access the deep web. He also asked me if I was planning on doing anything illegal, to which I replied no. He said that since I wasn't, we didn't need to install Tails, which apparently was a software that makes it more secure if you plan on doing illegal things. A little while later, everything was set up and I had my new IP address. My friend gave me a brief rundown on what to do and what not to do. He made it very clear that when I was using the hidden wiki, that I should keep it on censored mode, so that it would be less likely for me to see something I didn't want to see. After about 2 weeks of using the deep web, I felt like a pro. I had accessed many different sites, spoken with many great people, made friends, even bought some weed. I had become cocky and was ready to dig deeper into the dark web. I turned off the censored mode on the hidden wiki and began to browse the links. It took a while, mostly because Tor is a bit slow and many of the links just led to dead web pages. Eventually, I stumbled onto a site called All the Gore. It was mainly a big chat room with many different topics. I had a fairly strong stomach, and I had seen many violent movies. I had even seen beheadings and killings on the normal internet. After looking at a few different chat rooms, I noticed how sick the site really was. People in these chat rooms were actual killers, bragging about some of the things they had done. In the chat room, you could also post pictures. One man by the name of Culture045 had the stage in one of the chat rooms. He was explaining in detail how he broke into someone's house, kidnapped a little girl, and brutally killed her parents by hiding under their bed and then opening their throats. He then explained how he brought the little girl back to his house, raped her, beat her, and cut her up. I didn't think he was telling the truth at first, but then he posted pictures. These pictures were the most horrifying pictures I had ever seen. Close-ups of the poor 8 to 10-year-old girl being brutally raped, beaten, and cut with a knife. Culture kept posting pictures. The new ones were of the girl, tied to a chair, bleeding, crying, throwing up, etc. Then he showed a picture of him with a drill, drilling into her skull. The most haunting part was that while he was doing it, he was looking at the camera, with a look of sheer joy on his face. I had seen enough, and typed in the chat room window, "You people are sick. You deserve to die. How can you sleep at night?" Immediately, people began making fun of me, saying that I was just as helpless and ignorant as the little girl in the pictures, and that I should get off the big boy part of the internet. They began saying that I was a pussy and began calling me an empath. Then Culture typed something in the chat box. He said,
Really? Where do you live, buddy? I'm sure everybody would love to see you on this site.
I then made the biggest mistake of my life and typed, "I'm calling the police and having the site shut down." Less than a minute later, everything on the site went black and a new chat box appeared in green. In it, someone named Admin1 typed in the box. He said,
Call the cops, and you will regret it.
I didn't type anything in the box and reached for my cell phone. What happened next haunts me to this day. My phone said that I had a new message. I opened it, and it said,
Call the police, and you're dead.
There was no number. It didn't even say unknown number. It was just blank. I looked back at my laptop and saw my webcam light turn on. I quickly covered it, but then I saw on the screen a picture of me looking at my phone. I got wide-eyed and I froze for a moment. Admin typed again.
Put down the phone right now and uncover your webcam.
I put down my phone, but I kept the webcam covered. He typed again.
Okay, be like that.
Right after, he posted my full name, age, and address in the chat box and typed,
It would be a shame if you and your college buddies went missing, wouldn't it?
I then did as he said and uncovered my webcam. He then told me to follow his instructions on how to make it impossible for me to reach the site again. I followed each and every one. When I finished, I got a text that said,
Don't ever try and come back.
Just like before, it had no number. I still called the police from my friend's phone, but they were never able to find the site. If you ever go on the deep web, don't ever just mindlessly explore, especially when you don't have the additional software to keep you more secure. I was a stupid college kid, and I just hope nobody makes the same mistakes that I did. I moved to a different home and changed all of my information, but I still get nightmares about that day. Update. This happened to me a few days after my original story about the deep web. I was still extremely rattled about what had happened. The police tried to track down the website, but since there was no way for them to recover my history, and I had originally found the sick website by just randomly clicking links, it seemed pretty much hopeless to find it. The police told me to change all my information and move in with a friend. I decided to move in with my friend David. David was an extremely honest, hardworking person. He never went to parties, he never slacked off or got drunk or high. He was very dedicated to finishing college. In fact, he was one of the few people I knew at the time who wasn't going on the deep web on a regular basis. I told him about my experience with the deep web, and that's mostly why he agreed to let me stay with him. One night, we were both up studying late. when my phone went off. I looked to see who had texted me and saw that the person sending the message had no number. Just like last time, it read,
Check your computer.
There was nothing else to it, just that one simple instruction. I opened my laptop, and when I did, I noticed that I didn't have control of the mouse. I tried to move it, but the mouse just moved on its own. Someone had remote access to my computer somehow. I never gave anyone remote access before. I tried a whole bunch of keyboard commands, but not a single one worked. I noticed that whoever had control of my laptop was downloading a software. It was most likely malware, but there was nothing I could do. I heard my phone go off again, and this time the message said,
Look out your window.
I didn't know which window the guy was referring to, so I looked out the one that I was sitting by, and I saw a man in the parking lot leaning up against a white van. He had a phone in his hand, and when I looked at him, he nodded. My phone then went off again.
Hold down Shift Alt F5 at the same time to activate the software.
I called in David to my room to show him what was going on. He was just as nervous as I was, but with the man outside our window, we did not want to anger him. David called the police right away and told me that they would be there soon. I didn't activate the software and just sat there. Eventually, I got another text.
I'm coming in if you don't do it right now.
I didn't know why he or the person in control of my computer couldn't do it, but I didn't dare to ask. At the same time though, I was 99% sure that this program was malware, or spyware, or something that could be very harmful to my computer. I refused to activate it. David grabbed a baseball bat, just in case the man from outside tried to come in. About 5 minutes later, we heard the doorknob turning. It was locked. Then we heard loud banging on the door. We both freaked out and looked out the window again. Sure enough, the man and the van were both gone. The banging on the door got more and more violent, until eventually we heard a horrible scratching sound. It lasted for a few more minutes, and then we heard footsteps walk down the hall and eventually fade away. I received another text.
We will be back.
That really got to me. When the cops arrived, they told me to look at my door. I followed them back out into the hallway and saw engraved on our door my name. The police began to investigate the whole building, and they had a tech police officer come in and look at my computer. He began to do scans and investigate the weird software that was on my laptop. Eventually, he managed to close and remove it. He then told me that my laptop isn't safe. He said that the core files of it had been hacked into and corrupted. We did a complete wipe of my laptop, and he looked at my phone as well. Just like last time, he couldn't tell where the messages had come from. He told me that they would be sure to keep the cops nearby in case this ever happened again. The next day, I had just got back from school, and I was really tired. David wasn't home yet, so I went into my room and fell into bed. I had just begun to close my eyes when I heard a rattling sound in my closet. I lifted my head, but I didn't hear it again, so I went back to sleep. After a few minutes, the closet door swung open. I leapt out of bed and I saw a man with a mask walking over to me. I ran for the door and slammed it behind me. I ran out to the parking lot, started my car, and drove away as fast as I could. By the time the police arrived, the man was, of course, gone. The apartment surprisingly hadn't been wrecked or anything. We didn't find anything stolen. He didn't seem to do anything, at first. That night, 2 police officers were monitoring everyone who came in and out of the building in order to catch the man. I opened my laptop and noticed that my wallpaper had changed. It was just a bunch of trees, but it had been changed to a sickening photo of a man with a mask, the same mask I saw on the man who was in my closet. He was digging a knife into a baby's eye socket in what looked like a small cabin. I also noticed that all my applications and programs were gone. I saw the same software as last time, right in the middle. I clicked on it. It had already been installed. Just like last time, it filled the entire screen, and what looked like a live stream was going on. I could not exit out of it. The live stream was coming from a boy's house. He looked to be about 13 or 14 and was at his computer. It didn't take long for me to realize that I was watching through his webcam, and he had no idea. I saw a small chat box pop up on the top right-hand corner of the screen, and in it, someone typed in the box,
Welcome to our live stream. We're glad everyone could be here. Thank you, John, for being here as well.
My eyes got very wide, because my name is John, and they were waiting until I was watching to start the live stream. As I watched, I saw that the closet door behind the poor boy slowly opened, and a man walked out with the toolbox in one hand. He quietly sat the toolbox down and pulled out a roll of duct tape. He went behind the kid and put the duct tape over his mouth and grabbed him tight. The poor kid's face was of total fear. He tried to scream but couldn't because of the tape. They were making a decent amount of noise, so it told me that the kid must have been home alone. Before I continue the story, I want to give a major graphic warning. Please proceed with caution. I tried hard to exit out, but I couldn't. Then I saw the man take out a screwdriver and drive it into the kid's chest. Blood began to pour out, and the kid made a wheezing type noise. I saw tears form in his eyes as the sick man began to drive the screwdriver deeper and deeper. He then yanked it out. The man then took out a hammer and smashed the kid's hands several times until they were nothing but a mangled, bloody mess. I tried every command I could to exit out, but nothing was working. I noticed that in the chat box, several people were cheering the man on and requesting him to do different things to the boy. The man then took out a handheld electric saw, pressed it against the boy's face, and turned it on. The boy screamed in pain as the saw went up into his eye, causing blood to go everywhere. A little got on the camera as well. I started to get tears in my eyes as I couldn't stop it. Then the man took out a screwdriver and gouged out the kid's eyes, and took out a large knife. He then proceeded to slit the boy's throat and toss him to the ground. It was sick. I threw up all over the floor, and when I looked back, I saw in the chat box people typing horrible things like "fap, fap, fap," or "oh my god, that was so wonderful, thanks so much for doing this," etc. In the box, I saw someone named Culture 045 type,
Thanks for watching, John.
After that, the program closed on its own, and I was left with a sickening wallpaper. I was sweating, breathing heavy, and feeling sick. Throughout the entire thing, I didn't realize that my phone had gone off several times. I looked at it, and the most hateful, mean messages were coming in from my friends and family. I asked my mom what was going on, and she texted back, "You sent that sick, disturbing live stream to everyone. I can't believe who you are. The police have been called." I then felt even more sick than I was before. Those monsters had sent that live stream to all my friends somehow and made it look like it had come from me. They pretty much ruined my life within a couple of minutes. When the police arrived, I told them everything that happened. They quickly managed to explain everything to my friends and family. After that, they really cracked down on finding these people, and a month later, 4 men had been arrested. One was Culture 045, and the other was Admin 1. The 2 others were working with them. The site was found and shut down as well, and I got a new laptop and phone. I could say some horror cliche here and say something like I kept getting text messages or kept hearing weird things ever since, but none of that happened. They were arrested, and I never heard anything further. It's good to know that these men are in jail or perhaps even dead. But what still scares me is all the people watching the live stream who were there for pleasure and are still out there. And there are probably thousands of other Culture 045s out there as well, all over the world. If you ever go on the deep web, Make damn sure you're as careful as possible. Hey guys, Unit 522 here, and I want to thank you very much for watching my video. I would appreciate it very much if you would share, like, and comment. And if you're new to this channel, become one with the Unity by hitting the subscribe button. If you have a scary story or experience that you want featured on this channel, you can always send it to my email or post it on the Free Horror Stories subreddit. The links for those can be found in the description below. If you would like to help out this channel even more, consider a PayPal donation. And for more updates, be sure to follow me on Twitter. There's nothing wrong with a little darkness in your life, as long as you never forget, there's always a reason to be afraid. Number 1. This story is told from the point of view of a female. This is a story and a warning. I am serious about this. Always block your webcam. Duct tape is the easiest way, but there are plenty of other ways. I don't care how safe you think you are. You can be a target. Anyone can be a target. There are people out there who can hack into your computer and turn on your camera without your knowledge. They can watch you anytime while you think you're alone. They're not referred to as hackers. They're called watchers. I'm warning you about this because of my own encounter with a watcher. I was targeted when I entered an online chat room for a Reddit page. I thought it was harmless even though it was for horror enthusiasts. I started making some friends in the chat and revealed maybe a few too many details about myself. I described my physical characteristics: redhead, thick in the chest but slender in the waist, big eyes, sweet face, etc. I figured it would be helpful for people to put a face with a name, so I even sent them a picture. Maybe it was too sexy a picture, I don't know, but I made a few friends and had fun talking with them. Then someone specific took a liking to me. He said his name was Seamus. I pronounced it Seamus for the longest time until he corrected me. We would chat in the room for hours, soon moved it to Skype. I never did video chat, only typing. I figured it was innocent. He said he was my age, we had a lot in common. We were both gamers, we both loved computers, and we both had cats. He was funny and sweet, and I really liked chatting with him. But soon he started asking me weird questions. One day he asked me if I had a bunk bed. I said no, but he kept pushing me, telling me that he had this feeling I had a bunk bed. In truth, I did, but why would I share that? Finally, I relented and told him. It was a weird moment, but I brushed it off. Next, he started guessing my favorite bands, which was really strange. It was like he could read my mind. He even guessed my favorite movie, Shakespeare in Love. I didn't like our conversations so much anymore. He knew way too much about me. He started asking me if I knew how to dance. I said no, but he pushed me to try, saying,
"No one is watching you. Just dance around right now in your bedroom."
I told him I did, but I actually didn't. He then told me he knew I didn't do it, and that he was disappointed in me. He said he wouldn't talk to me again if I kept lying to him. That's when I noticed the little blue light on my webcam was on. Thank God I never used the camera, so it was thrown haphazardly on the side of my desk. It didn't capture my face or body at all, just the bed and the wall of posters behind it. I cringed a bit and then went to work. Watchers are idiots. They think they're immortal because of the cyberspace between them and their victims. They usually assume the person on the other end is just some dumb noob who has never hacked a site in her life. Some watchers are just young girls who think it's funny to see into people's bedrooms. But as you can imagine, most of them jerk off while their victims sit unknowingly. I then typed, "Do you really want to see me dance for you?" He typed back,
Yes. Yes.
"The thing about watchers is that they never do anything beyond watching. They are fucking cowards. They get their rocks off and then move on. But us visitors do more than just watch." So I flip on my view of his webcam. Of course, I'm a much better hacker than he is, so his light never turned on.
Phải làm gì khi gặp người nước ngoài? Đừng ngại, hãy nhờ họ làm hộ bài tập tiếng Anh. Trải nghiệm kinh hoàng của một du khách khi tới Việt Nam chỉ là muốn đi giải khát tí thôi nhưng lại gặp mấy đứa nhóc nhờ giải đề. Số là vừa vào quán ăn đang định làm cái đùi gà nóng hổi thì mấy đứa nhóc bản địa này ở đâu nhảy ra nhờ làm đề tiếng Anh hộ. Đó nước của ông đó ông làm đi. Ok thôi được rồi các cháu để tôi. Cũng may sao ông bác xử lý đống để ngon ơ, lại còn cười vui vẻ chụp hình với mấy đứa. Chủ tút chia sẻ hôm sau chữa bài đáp án đúng hết nha. Cảm ơn ông bác nhiều.
The girl's decomposed face filled his screen. She had been dead for months, and her face was a fleshy pit of maggots and half-eaten eyes. Seamus, real name Ron, screamed and nearly squeezed his junk off. I laughed. I bet he wasn't expecting the cute little redhead to actually be an adult woman with a propensity for violence. Then I turned the camera to my face. I wore my usual black ski mask. Ron tried desperately to turn the feed off, but I had locked it. He was stuck. I lay the body of the dead girl over my lap. I pushed on one of her cheeks until it sank deep into the skull. Ron vomited, but did not leave the room. Don't bother looking for him. I'm typing from his computer right now. So as you can see, you should always put duct tape over your webcam. That way you don't get those disgusting watchers seeing into your life without permission. But the best part of the duct tape? It provides a challenge to us visitors. It makes it much harder to find you. But we always do.
Number 2.
A couple of weeks ago, I came across a list of controllable webcams. It was a whole list of links, each one leading you to a website that showed a live camera feed. There was schools, backyards, streets, factories, offices, etc. All of them live streaming whatever was happening. Some places were in different time zones, and there was little you could see through the night. Others showed people working, passing by, and otherwise minding their own business, completely unaware a stranger on the internet could be watching them. From what I've read, many surveillance systems were not properly configured, and when connected to a Wi-Fi network, ended up being visible on the internet without even requiring a password to access. I have to admit, I felt kind of wrong spying on people like that, but at the same time, it was exciting. From the safety of my bedroom, I could watch other people without them ever realizing what I was doing. And deep inside, I felt like I was doing something wrong, but curiosity got a hold of me. I decided I would spy just a little. Every evening when I got home, I would tune into some webcams just for a couple of minutes. It became kind of an addiction. I felt bad about it, but I simply couldn't help myself. One cam in particular showed several police officers at somebody's front yard. Then a few minutes later, somebody was being carried out on a stretcher. I went to bed later wondering about what could have happened. That person could have been killed, which would explain the police. I didn't even know who it was, but I watched. I probably knew about that person's death before their loved ones did. I decided I had to stop at once, but the next day one camera in particular kept me going. In my defense, I almost immediately closed the tab when I saw it. It was somebody's house, but not the outside like usual. It was inside the house. 3 cameras, one in the living room, one in the hallway, and one in the bedroom. I know you must be thinking that's crossing the line. That's what I thought too. I looked at it for a few seconds, swiping from one camera to the next. It seemed to be a common house, nothing unusual about it. I just didn't feel right looking into somebody's house. I closed the tab and went on to browse something else, but soon enough, I was back. I just wanted to watch. There was just something so exciting about this forbidden spying. I started to look at the details. The TV in the living room was very similar to mine. From the hallway camera, you could see a little of the kitchen in the background. The bedroom was very simple, with just a bed and a laptop on a desk. I became obsessed with it. I saved the link and would watch it every single day. I started gathering the details. It seemed to be in the same time zone I was in, given that our sunsets were at the same time. I can never catch anyone inside, but every day there was something slightly different. One day the laptop was on the sofa in the living room. The other day the bed was undone, but there was never anyone to be seen. In the back of my mind, I was actually concerned about whoever lived here, and if they were aware their place was publicly visible on the internet. I wondered if there was any way to contact them. Their cameras were not controllable like others were. You could pan left and right on some of them, but not all. But then again, if I contacted them, the fun would be over. It's not my fault, I thought. Better just to leave it. Last Friday, I visited the link again. I still remember it like it was yesterday. I had bought a couple of beers and some snacks, planning to spend the rest of the night on my computer. I live alone, so that's pretty much what I do on my evenings after work. This time I had a different surprise. The video was black in all three of the cameras. My heart sank. Damn, I thought. They probably turned the cameras off. I swiped through the cameras. Then I noticed something. I could see a very faint light coming from the living room window. The cameras were on. The lights were off. I felt a rush of excitement, followed by a chill on my neck down through my spine. A realization came upon me. It was always night when I browsed these cameras, but the footage was always visible. The lights were always on, even though nobody was home. This time, though, they were off. There was something eerie about watching that house in complete darkness. I looked through all three cameras again, trying to discern something, anything in the dark. Nothing but the faint glow of the living room window through the curtains. I turned the volume up in the hopes that this camera had a microphone. I quickly grabbed my headphones and put them on. At first, I heard nothing, but then it started. A distant, muffled crying. It would come and go in short intervals. I clicked the bedroom camera to see if I could listen to the sound. Nothing. In the hallway camera, there was a sound, but it was much quieter. In the living room camera, though, it was there. The emotionless, weak, short moan. It would come, then silence. Then I would hear the moan again. Suddenly, I hear a couple of steps. The crying became desperate, as if somebody was trying to scream but was unable to. My volume was almost at maximum, so the sound that came out of my headphones scared the shit out of me. It was the voice of a calm man. "Do you want to watch?" That was it. In a panicked rush, I pulled my headphones
Phải làm
off,
gì khi gặp
got
người
up
nước
from
ngoài?
my chair
Đừng
and
ngại,
closed the
hãy nhờ họ
browser.
làm hộ bài tập tiếng Anh.
I just wanted to
Trải
block
nghiệm kinh hoàng
contact
của
with
một
whatever the fuck was happening in that place. I swore out loud, trying to calm myself down. What the fuck was that? I walked into my kitchen and grabbed a beer, and started to get my thoughts straight. There were clearly two different people inside that house. One of them seemed tied up, against their will. Was that the reason for the crying? The other person, though, was aware of the cameras. Was he talking to me? That can't be the case. He could have been talking to anyone who was watching. Whoever this person was, he knew his house was being recorded. I searched the internet, trying to find anything about it. If someone had witnessed this, they would be talking about it. But I found nothing. Nobody had seen it, or at least nobody wanted to talk about it. I thought about posting the link and talking about it, but if that person was aware his house was being recorded, he was also probably aware of his link being shared. What if I posted something and this person found out about it? Could he track me down? He probably wanted the audience. I decided not to give him that. Should I call the police? And tell them what? There was a camera somewhere showing completely dark footage? What would the cops do about that? I went to play some games to get my mind out of it. I opened my snacks, had a couple of beers, and after a couple of hours, I had my mind out of this matter. My week went by as usual. I didn't browse any cameras. In fact, I did my best to stay away from them. But each passing day, I felt my curiosity creeping inside me. Each day, I felt a stronger desire just to peek, until about 3 days ago. Just a few seconds, I clicked on the link. Maybe this time I could find out where the house was. I could pay attention to the windows, or see if I could find any papers or documents, or anything that could give me a clue of its whereabouts. Again, the house was quiet. The lights were on, but nobody was inside. I was creeped out beyond my mind looking at these cameras again. Nothing moved. It was just a living room. I mustered the courage to click the hallway link. There was nothing there either. Clicking the bedroom link was much harder. What if the guy was there? Could he talk to me again? Would he be looking at the camera? I took a deep breath and clicked. A bedroom, a desk, closed curtains, lights on, and nothing else. I tried looking through the curtains, but they were thick enough so nothing was visible outside. I wondered if they've always been like this. The first time I saw this place, were the curtains closed? I think they were. The curtains were always closed. Back to the bedroom. I could see the bedroom and the desk as usual, but not the laptop. I looked around on the floor and on the bed, but it was not there. I clicked the living room footage again, and the laptop was not there either. He must have left and took it somewhere. That was the obvious conclusion. I let out a scream and jumped back in my chair. The footage had been suddenly replaced with a recording of myself. It was my face, looking forward. I got up and stepped back from my chair. It obviously wasn't live. It was a recording from my own laptop's webcam. In it, I was using the computer, drinking a beer and eating a snack. It was from a couple of days ago. There was something strange about the video though. I wasn't in the center of it. It was as if the camera was not out to film me. I then realized the video was edited, slightly zoomed in at the window behind me. There was a silhouette of a person standing by the window. A chill ran down my spine, and I started to panic. I turned back to my bedroom window. The curtains were open as usual. There was nothing out of the ordinary. The only thing clearly visible outside was the street sign. That's how he had found me. The damn street sign was visible through my webcam. I closed the streaming tab on my computer, the living room footage still streaming back my own unaware face from days ago. I closed the lid on my laptop and ran around the house, closing every window, making sure my door was locked. I barely knew how to use a knife, but I grabbed one anyway. I turned on every light, looked in every corner, below my bed, behind the shower curtains, behind the fridge, inside the closet. I was alone inside at least. As I calmed down, I started thinking more clearly. How could this person have access to my webcam? I connected to his own camera. That's probably how he found out my computer's IP address, and that's how he broke into my webcam. I reached for my phone and called 911. I explained that there was somebody outside my house watching me through my windows. There probably wasn't, but I was nervous, so I just had to call for help. In the most stressful couple of minutes of my life, I remained alone before the police showed up. When they arrived, they searched around and inside the house and found nobody. I explained to the officer what happened, how this person spied on me through my webcam. I couldn't help but notice the irony of it. I told him every single detail about it. He assured me that there was nobody around, and that I could call them any time if I noticed something strange. Nothing strange has happened since, so I'm starting to feel safer, at least safe enough to share my own story. It's still hard to sleep though, thinking I could end up like that person who was tied up and crying desperately in the stranger's house.
There's always a reason to be afraid. Number 1.
When I was little, there was a series of child abductions around my hometown. Or anyway, that's what the local news and papers called it. Truth is, I was from a small county where there wasn't much news to report. What would probably be an average amount of kids disappearing or running away became a headlining story of a killing spree across the countryside. Not to say it wasn't frightening. It was shocking when those kids went missing. First was a young boy a couple of towns over. He was about 2 or 3 years old. It wasn't even publicized until the next 2 kids went missing in the following months. Another little boy in my own neighborhood, around my age, and a little girl was taken from a large acre property off the highway. Once the baby girl disappeared, there was a huge panic in the surrounding towns. They said on the news that the abductions were suspected to be related. They set an early curfew on minors and organized search parties, but they never found anything. I wasn't really afraid. Maybe it was because I didn't understand what the disappearances implied. But I asked my mom about it one night. She was a young single parent and liked to joke around with me a lot. Scare the shit out of me, really. But I loved her. I came home from school one day with a pamphlet they handed out to all the kids in the district. I had to get my mom to sign it and return it. It was information on the location of the abductions and tips on keeping one's children out of danger. Walk home in groups, don't talk to strangers, the basics. She read it over with me at dinner. I agreed to walk home with the neighbor kids and lock all the doors and windows when I got home, if she was working the night shift that day. She came in my room and tucked me in later that night. She kissed my cheek and turned off the light. You know, I wonder if it's the witch from the backwoods. She raised an eyebrow at me, peeking back around the doorway. I pulled my legs up from the edge of the bed. What witch? My voice cracked. Never mind. I shouldn't have brought it up. She started to walk back down the hallway. Mom, I called. She walked back in my room with a sly grin and sat at the edge of my bed. Did I scare you? She laughed. No, I just never heard of the witch from the woods, I pouted. Oh, I see. Do you want to hear about her? I nodded and pulled my covers tighter around me. Well, they say that there's a witch that lives in the woods near the river. She wasn't always a witch. She actually used to be a young, very beautiful girl. She had a boy who was in love with her, and they were even going to get married. But her love had to go make a living in the city before he could buy her a house and a ring. So he went away while she waited in her father's house in the backwoods. Is the house still there? The police should go check it. I squirmed. My mom then shushed me. The girl waited and waited, and after a while she realized that she had a baby growing inside of her. My mom smiled. She had a baby on the way, so she wrote a letter to the boy to tell him about the good news. She started sewing clothes and blankets and toys for when it came. She was happy. She always wanted a baby of her own. But why did she turn evil, though? My mother's face fell blank. She got a letter back from the boy that she loved, but it was not what she expected. The boy she loved had met another girl in the city. He fell in love with her and decided he would stay there and marry her instead. What about the baby? He called the girl a liar and said the baby didn't belong to him. Well, was it? The baby was his, but the boy was not coming back, plain and simple, and it broke the girl's heart and turned it into a black witch's heart. What did she do? She got sick. She was in so much pain and heartache that she couldn't eat or drink, and eventually, she lost her baby. That's not even scary. That's only sad. The story isn't over, she whispered, and crept her fingers up my arm. She wanted her baby so bad, and it was taken from her. But she had a witch's heart now, and it poisoned her. It urged her to do terrible things. It urged her to go out at night and climb into a town person's window and steal a new baby for herself. She took the baby back to her house by the river. She was so happy she finally had a baby of her own to love, and she could forget about the boy. She could now make use of all the clothes and blankets and toys she made, but there was something she didn't know about having a witch's heart. She didn't know her heart turned black and poisoned her, and the poison was a curse. My mom looked towards the light coming from the hall. She loved her stolen baby dearly, but something inside of her had changed. Her heart? I offered. Her heart. The same way it urged her to steal the new baby, it now urged her to kill that baby. Maybe it was because it truly wasn't hers, or maybe it was because it reminded her of the heartache that took her baby away. But at the same time, she loved that stolen baby. She wanted to take him to the river and drown him. Did she kill him? Did she kill the baby? No. She didn't kill the stolen baby. Instead, she went back out into the night and took another child. She took it to the river and drowned it. It broke her heart again to do it, but it eased the curse. And when she went back inside to her stolen boy, she no longer had the urge to drown him anymore. She cried and cried. She was so happy, but she couldn't let anyone find out what she did. She would have to stay at the river house until the boy grew, and the town forgot about the missing babies. She only slipped away into town to bring milk for her baby and food for herself. She spent the rest of the time raising the stolen boy and sewing him toys from scraps of the drowned baby's clothes. But one day, she woke up and she looked at her stolen boy and cried again. The curse was back. She thought it had been cured, but she felt it again. Now, even stronger than before. She realized then that curses don't fade. You feed them, and they sleep, until they grow hungry again. My mom turned to me. I had my blanket tied on my throat. She laughed and pulled it a little tighter. How does it end? How does it end? My mother repeated. Those babies that just went missing. If the witch is the one that has been stealing them, the story isn't over yet. I glanced out my window, then my closet. There were so many places a witch could be lurking. I asked my mom if I could sleep with her, and she agreed. Just tonight though. Tomorrow I have to work late, and you'll have to go to bed before I get back. I regretted asking about the witch with a groan. One more boy went missing that summer, and then the abduction stopped. Over the years, whenever a kid disappeared, everybody jumped at the opportunity to blame the serial abductor of my childhood. No bodies were ever found. Sometimes the kids would come home, and it turned out they had just ran away. When I was in high school, I learned the truth about what people thought took those kids every few years in the surrounding area. People said it was some maniac taking the kids from their home and breaking their little bodies. I guess I believed it too, after a while. Chester the molester. Every town had one, and kids went missing all the time, everywhere. To tell you the truth, I never really thought much about it. But the night my mom told me that story, I'll never forget. She had a way with words. She used to scare the hell out of me all the time, and I loved it. It was our thing. Without a dad around, I didn't have the typical male figure to teach me to be fearless and strong, but my mom did it well enough. I think her stories were her own way of teaching me to be brave and to keep my eyes wide, even when I'm terrified. It was her own way of teaching me how to be a man. My mom is dead now. She killed herself. She had developed a drinking problem as I got older. When I left for college, without me there to take care of her, it only got worse. Then one day, a few years after I moved away, I got a call from a lawyer about my inheritance. She left everything to me, which wasn't really much. A dingy old car, a small savings that I spent on the funeral, and a home that belonged to a grandfather I had never met. The funeral was small. A couple I didn't recognize came, and I introduced myself. The man explained that he was an old friend of my mom's from high school. I thanked him for coming, and they left. There was something familiar about him, but I didn't think too hard about it. After all, I had just lost my mother. I decided to take a few more days' leave and drive out to my grandpa's old house. Well, my house. It was hard to find, but I eventually came to it. It was a beautiful old cabin that must have been at least 100 years old, and it was totally secluded, down a long private road, right on the water. I thought about bringing the girl I was seeing here for a weekend before the end of the summer. I parked and walked up the dark wood porch. The key resisted the lock at first, Maybe it had rusted over the years, but I managed to fit it and went inside. Old furniture covered in dust, a small stack of vinyl in the corner next to a turntable. It was a pretty small house overall. A small kitchen, a living room, one bathroom, and 2 small bedrooms. I scoped out the master bedroom, opening desk drawers and wall cabinets. Nothing really remarkable, just dust. I went to the smaller room and realized it was a girl's room. My mom's? There were books stacked high on the shelves, slippers on the floor, and an old leather jacket in the closet. I smirked. Mom always hinted at a wilder side, before I came along. I realized I hadn't seen her in over a year, and I would never get the chance again. I decided it was a good time to leave. I would come back some other time and clean the place out. Maybe bring somebody along. I turned to look the place over once more, before locking it back up, when I saw another doorknob peeking out from behind a heavy curtain on the wall. I pulled it aside and opened the door. It was a basement. I took my cell phone out and lit the stairs. It was fully cemented and really small. Maybe it was meant to be a pantry or a wine cellar. I got to the bottom and looked around the small space. There was an armchair in the corner, next to an end table, and a bigger piece of furniture under a sheet. I opened the end table and pulled out a stack of papers and mail. There was an envelope addressed to my mother. I thumbed my mother's name before putting the stack back down. I lifted my cell phone to the blanketed thing, occupying most of the space down there. I lifted the sheet off and tossed it aside. It was a bassinet. I lifted the small crumpled bundle inside. A small moth-eaten blanket unfolded, spilling out a couple of little stuffed animals. I picked one up and held my light to it. It was a tiny patchwork bear. I looked closer at it. It was made up of tiny pieces of fabric. I set it down and turned around. I looked towards the light coming from the top of the stairs. A crib in the cellar, behind a hidden door. I picked up the letter from the stack of papers on the end table. I reread the address. The same one the lawyer had written down for me. It didn't occur before then, but I knew about this house all along. Backwood Lane. I shine my light back to the bassinet and the little stuffed animals inside. Patchwork toys, sewn from shreds of baby clothes.
Number 2.
This happened between 1986 and 1987. My father bought a farm in the Free State province of South Africa, which the locals called Gampamadi. It's Sotho, a Native American language for the place where the blood flows. The first week or so, everything went without incident. I was about 3 at the time, so this story is partly what I remember and mostly what I've been told. Unearthly knocks. Around the 3rd night or so of the 2nd week, there came a knock at the master bedroom window. My dad opened the curtain to find no one there. Just as he got to bed, the knock came again, but this time from the kitchen, at the other end of the house. My dad got up, but again found no one there. As he turned his back on the door, all hell broke loose. The knocking started again, but went in rapid succession from one window to another, covering the whole house. As my dad gathered us all together, it suddenly started hailing stones. It went on like this for the rest of the night, until the first African plovers started their calls in the morning. And then all went silent. Apparently, it did not only torment us as the owners of the farm. The farm workers who were left the next morning didn't want to start work out of fear for the Tokoloshi, similar to Russia's Domovoi. They believed it responsible for the phenomenon. Most workers even left the same day. A glimpse into the past. Things slowly escalated from there, as if testing my parents' tolerance. Lots of times I called my mom while playing, bathing, etc., telling her to make the uncle leave, only for her to find no one around. Other spirits also started appearing around the house and garden. I believe that these were former owners and inhabitants of our farm. They appeared to be wearing clothes from the early 1900s. An older gentleman in his 60s haunted the house, smoking a pipe. The smell of pipe smoke would sometimes fill the living room, with a young man around his early 20s. On bright, sunny days, we'd see a woman in her 30s cutting roses from the formal garden. A young girl around 5 years old ran around her mother, both of them wearing bonnets as was the custom among Boer folk for centuries. A few nights later, my family heard the neighing of horses in the old stone kraal, a type of cattle or livestock enclosure. There was the sound of hoofs on the ground, the muted voices of men talking or discussing something, and the sound of the heavy iron gates swaying open, followed by a voice calling, "Voorwaarts, men!" It roughly translates from Afrikaans, which is closely related to Dutch, to "charge men." The horses would then bolt from the open gates, circling the house, accompanied by the sound of horse whips. This usually lasted around 30 minutes every night. The creepy part is that the kraal was used by the Boers during the Anglo-Boer War of 1899. There are also some British graves in the middle of one of the cornfields as a reminder of the Boer victory during some unnamed battle in 1900. Dog trouble. Our healthy Boer Bull dogs were lying on their backs with their eyes turned back in their sockets, their mouths foaming. At first, my parents thought the animals had been poisoned. My father fetched the pickup, put the dogs on the back, and rushed toward town to take them to a vet. Just as my father exited the gate at the border of the farm, the dogs suddenly got up and acted as if nothing was wrong. This continued countless times with the dogs, immobilized for up to 15 minutes. Brother attacked. Things quickly got worse from this point on. The sound of stones raining on the corrugated roof got worse, and the entity started finding human targets. My father and my 17-year-old brother were on the patio one evening when a stone hit my brother on the forehead. My father and brother both described the sound as a high-pitched whizzing noise, as if the stone had been hurled from a slingshot. The next day, my father installed powerful spotlights around the house and cut all of the lovely fruit trees surrounding the home down in an attempt to catch the culprits. It was all to no avail. Everything continued as usual with no one in sight. It seemed as if the rocks being thrown materialized from thin air. At this stage, the activity started to focus on my brother. He stayed in his own one-bedroom flat about 10 meters from the main house. One night he was studying for a year-end exam when something unseen attacked him from behind. My brother was big and strong and into bodybuilding at that time, but an epic struggle ensued with the creature trying to strangle him for 25 minutes. When my brother finally broke loose from the creature's grip, he was covered in blood and it looked like he'd been strangled with a garrote wire. His chest looked like it had been slashed by claws or blunt metal blades. To this day, in his 40s, he still bears the scars on his chest. The Hellhound. My brother was not the only victim, as it turned out. My mom was lying on the bed one day reading a book when she suddenly became paralyzed. Shortly thereafter, a bulldog appeared at the bedroom door. My mother said it felt like an eternity as she soaked in every detail of the entity. It was also a Boerbell dog, but he had a white spot between his eyes, whereas ours had black masks. Its face was tinted reddish pink as if by blood, and red slime dripped from its mouth. The dog then started towards her, jumping on the bed, pinning her down, and started staring her into the eyes. After what must have felt like an eternity, the dog jumped off and left the room. This happened a few times more, even at night with my father next to her. Being paralyzed, my mother could not alert my father. An aunt investigates. Being a stout Protestant Christian, my aunt did not believe the account she heard from my mother, so she came to visit with my niece, who was around 15 at the time. My sister and my niece were sitting in the bath when a stone flew through the window and cracked the tub between them. My aunt decided to brave the night and sleep over, but when we woke up the next morning, my aunt and niece were gone. They'd packed their bags in the middle of the night and drove nearly 400 kilometers home. I actually admire her for her bravery, as she had to go outside and walk the 20 meters to her car. She said something happened in the spare bedroom shortly after we switched off the lights, but she refused to tell us what happened to this very day. Things get worse. Although the activity usually started around dusk and continued until the first American plovers called in the early morning hours, activity started to happen during daylight hours as well. There would be whispering around the house as two dark shadows moved around. These same two dark shadows also circled the house every night. We believed that they were the cause for poltergeist-like activity. It is actually reported by the natives that Tokoloshis usually work in pairs. At this point, the only time the activity ceased was when the police or people who did not have a close bond to the family visited. It immediately resumed after they left. Around this time, spontaneous fires started around the employees' homes. It started out almost harmless, but one day one of the employees came bashing at the door screaming that one of their workers' house was burning down and that the flames were leaping from the windows. The worker was on leave and the door was locked from the outside with a strong deadbolt. When they finally opened the door, witnesses saw that only the edges of the kitchen cupboards were burning. After the flames were extinguished and all the smoke subsided, they were shocked to find that there was no damage apart from the burst windows and smoke damage. The witch doctor arrives. My parents now got desperate as my father had put all their savings into a deposit for the farm. Selling it then would have financially ruined them. The church did not seem to care and even alleged that my parents did this for attention. My parents used to be respected people in this town as my father was head of the traffic department and a deacon in the church. Suddenly people laughed behind their backs and most in town had abandoned my family at this stage. Some even accused my brother of staging it all. My dad now was being fed up with nothing working and contacted a traditional witch doctor from the old Botswana. When the witch doctor came, he asked for a glass of water, looked into it and told my father things of a very personal nature. Things very few people know. Certainly no one in the town knew. The witch doctor started to perform a cleansing ritual before he removed a few boxes filled with stuff like fingernail clippings, hair, etc. He then went on to tell my dad that the previous owner had put a curse on the farm as he was pissed off because he went bankrupt and wanted no one else to stay for long. The night after the cleansing, a storm came up, but instead of thunder, there was the crying of a baby. Very freaky. The wind blew from one border fence of the farm to the other, about 1,500 hectares, and then almost everything stopped as suddenly as it had started. Most people don't believe my story, but trust me, sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction. Hello everyone, my name is Mr. Davis. I would love if you checked out my channel to hear more. Right now I'm nearing 8,000 subscribers, and it would be great if you guys could come over there and help me reach that goal. And a big thanks to Unit 522 for having me on once again. He's a great guy and a great friend. With that said, stay safe and stay creepy.
There's always a reason to be afraid. Number 1.
A few details before I start my story. I live in Northern California in a small townhouse with my girlfriend. I've decided to change the names of both people and places just to be cautious. I don't want anyone going out to the beach I was at trying to dig up clues and instead find the trouble that I found. I'm sorry this is so long. I've tried to keep it as brief as possible. You have to understand that I've barely slept at all in days, and it's difficult for me to keep my thoughts in order. Saturday, March 26th, John and I found the camcorder half buried in the sand on Stinson Beach. When I picked it up out of the sand, water leaked out from inside the camcorder. Sand was packed into every crevice, and the battery pack was missing. I dried it off with a beach towel, popped the cassette drive open. There was a digital cassette cartridge inside. It had a yellow plastic head and a Panasonic logo, but no label or sticker attached. It seemed like the camcorder itself was pretty much trashed, but we figured it still might be possible to recover the data on the tape itself. I had an older Sony digital camcorder at home, that used the same type of tape. I took the tape and camcorder inside with me when John dropped me off at home later that day. I sat down at my computer desk and forgot all about it for almost a week. Thursday, March 31st. John came over again next Thursday and saw it on my desk. I told him I had forgotten about it and hadn't even tried to play back the tape yet. We popped it into my Sony camcorder and hooked it up to my PC's FireWire port, opened up Roxio's video capture application, and told it to scan the tape for footage. Only one scene appeared on screen. I will describe it to you as best as I can recall. A few feet in front of the camera is a woman. Her back is to the camera, and she is walking down a narrow dirt path, possibly even a deer trail. Tall dry grass and small bushes line either side of the path. Based on the lighting, it's most likely sometime in the early morning or evening. The sky is cloudless and tinged with a soft orange color. Other than the shuffle of her footsteps, the only thing that can be heard is seagulls crying and the soft sound of ocean waves breaking against the shore in the distance. She's wearing what used to be a one-piece swimsuit. The top half has been ripped or cut apart and now hangs down off her hips. She is naked from the waist up. Dozens of ugly red welts and cuts across her back. It looks like she had been whipped or beaten badly with a stick. A length of thin rope, more like a twine, has been used to bind her hands behind her back. The twine is wound so tightly against her wrists that you can see her hands have begun to turn a shade of blue from lack of circulation. The twine is cutting into her skin, and small rivulets of blood have run down her hands and fingers, dripping onto the dirt trail behind her. During the course of the scene, she only takes a few dozen steps. The clip is only 30 seconds long. Right before the clip ends, a man's voice can be heard.
Are you filming? You better not be filming yet. I told you to wait till we get inside.
And then, the clip ends. John and I were both unsettled by that short scene on the tape. Someone's home video had gone horribly wrong. I tried to copy the clip to my computer, but every time we played the file back, it was just a mess of scrambled green lines with no audio. John took the tape with him when he went home later that evening. He wanted to try to use his MacBook and his parents' camcorder to see if he was able to recover the clip. He said that maybe it was just a problem with my FireWire cable. It was the last time I ever saw him. Friday, April 1st. At this point, I can't think of any unusual happenings. A normal Friday workday, no different from dozens of other Fridays before it. I called John to ask him about the tape, but he said he hadn't had the time to look at the tape again. But he was going to stop by his parents' house after work and borrow their camcorder for the weekend. Sunday, April 3rd. John calls me. It was in the evening, sometime before 7, I think. He sounded excited and tells me that he was able to get the clip saved onto his Mac. The video plays back, but the sound is missing. I tell him to upload the video online, but he wants more time to try to get the audio working too. Wednesday, April 6th. Unable to get a hold of John for 2 days. Calls are going straight to voicemail. Finally, he calls me on Wednesday just as I'm getting ready to leave work. I don't think I noticed it at the time, but looking back on the events, his voice sounded odd. There was almost no inflection to his speech. It was flat and emotionless. I thought he was calling about the tape, but when I asked, he told me it wasn't important anymore. He said that he found something and we needed to go back to the beach. It takes almost 2 hours to get to Stinson from my house, and I told him that there was no way I was able to get out there on a weeknight after work. And even if I could, I would be nearing dark by the time we got out of there. For some reason, this seemed to make him angry. I promised I would go on Saturday with him. He said he needed to go that night, and there was something very important. He kept saying that he had something to show me. I asked what, but he said I had to see it for myself. Finally, he called me a stubborn asshole and hung up. Thursday, April 7th. John won't answer my calls. His voicemail says his inbox is full and won't accept any more new messages. Friday, April 8th. When I get up to take a shower in the morning, there is a small amount of wet sand spread out on the bottom of the tub. I think that maybe Sarah has only now gotten to rinsing her bathing suit from the time we were at the beach 2 weeks ago. Although I don't see her suit hanging up to dry anywhere in the bathroom, it's mildly puzzling, but I forget about it as soon as I leave for work. Only now do I realize it was the start of the strange occurrences that were about to drive me into a frantic state that I'm currently in today. Later at work, my phone chimes indicating that I have a new voicemail. I hadn't noticed the phone was ringing, but this isn't entirely unusual, as I don't have the best reception inside the office. It's certainly not the first time this has happened. I dial into my voicemail and it's a message from John. He sounds calm, no hint of his previous anger. I'm going back to Stinson again tomorrow morning. Meet me there. There is something I want to show you. I finish up my workday and go home. I decide to tell Sarah about the tape and how it's making John act very strange. But when I get home, she still hasn't gotten back from work. I make myself dinner and watch TV, and there's still no sign of her. I call up her work, and they tell me she left when her shift ended at 4 p.m. I call her mom in LA to ask if she's heard any word from Sarah, but she hasn't, and seems as worried as I am. I fall asleep on the couch watching TV. Sarah was still gone when I woke up on Saturday morning. With Sarah missing, there's no way I can go meet up with John. I go online and try to find any reports of traffic accidents on Friday evening. Finally, I decide to call the sheriff's office. They tell me that I can file a missing persons report. There is no waiting period to do so. I give them all the details, and they promise to call me back as soon as they hear something. Sarah's mom calls me again in the evening. She's very upset that no one can find any trace of her daughter. Sunday, April 10th. I awoke from the most vivid nightmare in the early hours of Sunday morning. In the dream, I'm sleeping in my bed. I wake up and I'm freezing cold. The bed is totally soaked with nearly frozen water, and it reeks of salt and seaweed. Everything is wet. The mattress, the pillows, the blankets, everything. My arms are wrapped around Sarah, and her body is just as cold as the water, possibly even colder. I prop myself up and turn on the lamp next to the bed. Sarah is asleep on her side, with her back to me, and I see that her arms have been bound behind her back with twine. It's turned her hands blue, and there's blood seeping out from the cuts in her wrists. I am paralyzed by absolute terror, the kind you can only experience in a dream. Slowly, Sarah rolls from her side onto her back, and I see her face. It's her, but she looks deformed. Her face is too broad, and her nose looks flattened and smashed, almost like she's pressed up against a piece of glass. Her eyes are bright and shiny. Her mouth is locked into a terribly wide grin. There are far too many teeth inside her mouth. She tells me there's something she needs to show me. I wake up in an empty bed, bathed in sweat and tangled in the bed covers. I swear, I can still smell the ocean. Eventually, I leave the house to get food. On my return, I noticed wet, sandy footprints leading from the grassy lawn right up to my front door. There's a wet piece of twine wrapped tightly around my door handle. When I untie it, I notice my hands have been stained a dull red. Monday, April 11th. I couldn't sleep. I called in to work and told them that I was feeling sick. I lay on the couch all day watching TV, and I have no appetite. At some point, I must have dozed off. I woke up and the TV was blaring noise. A local news report was on, and a reporter was yelling, almost screaming his news report. It was a story about hundreds of dead bodies washing up on the beach last night, all of them with their hands bound behind their backs. He then looks directly into the camera, almost like he's looking right at me, and says, "You need to get to the beach. There's something I need to show you." The TV turns off. My apartment is freezing, and I can smell salt water. Tuesday, April 12th. Another night of fitful sleeping, but at least no more dreams. I am exhausted from stress and lack of sleep. It's difficult to keep my thoughts in order. I called my work and told them that I was still sick. For some reason, I didn't want them to know about my missing girlfriend. In the evening, a deputy from the sheriff's called me. He told me that they found Sarah's car abandoned in a parking lot near Stinson Beach. I tried asking him more questions, but he seemed very elusive and wouldn't give me any straight answers. I hope they don't consider me a suspect in her disappearance. He told me that I needed to meet them at Stinson first thing tomorrow morning so they could ask me some questions. Shouldn't they want to question me at the sheriff's office? Before he hung up, he told me that it was imperative that I be at Stinson tomorrow morning. He said there was something he needed to show me. I called Sarah's parents and her dad answered the phone. I told them about the deputy finding her car. He said it wasn't important anymore and that it was going to be okay. Just make sure you meet with the deputy tomorrow morning, okay? There is something you need to see. Tuesday, April 13th. Another nightmare. God, I hope it was a nightmare. I'm so tired from not sleeping. It's hard to tell what's real and what isn't. In the dream, I was lying in bed. The clock said 3:28 a.m. I woke up to a soft tapping noise coming from the bedroom window. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. I hear the tap 2 more times and then Sarah's voice. Walter, I know you're in there. Please let me in. There's something I want to show you. Walter? The bedroom window is on the 2nd floor. I ran downstairs, my gaze locked onto the floor, afraid of what I might see outside the window, even though the blinds were drawn closed. I fled into the small guest bedroom on the 1st floor and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The house is filled with the smell of seawater again, stronger than before. Wednesday, April 14th. I am terrified and nearly mad with the need for sleep. I don't know what to do or who to ask for help. I know I can't stay locked in this room all day. I've decided to write all this down and post it online, some place where I know people can read it, but possibly won't take it seriously. I'm afraid I won't make it back home ever again, but I have to go down to Stinson. I have to talk to the sheriff. He's already called me twice asking me where I am, and if he shouldn't just send someone to pick me up and drive me down there. Hopefully everything will work out okay, and I'll be back home later this evening. Hopefully.
Number 2.
As an only child growing up in Clarence, Iowa, at most times I found myself playing alone in my backyard or sitting in front of my television watching whatever we had on VCR. DVD players had already been out for years at the time, but my father was working as a mechanic in some random guy's garage, and we really couldn't afford to buy a DVD player. I had to resort to VHS tapes, but at least my mother would take me to the used game store, which also sold VHS tapes and DVDs, every once in a while. I became addicted to owning VHS tapes, even as a 6-year-old boy, and honestly, I still am to this day. The Disney and Tim Burton films were my absolute favorites. I just could not get enough of Toy Story and The Lion King. My grandmother had given me 4 tapes as an early birthday gift. I don't remember the other 2, but I do remember receiving All Dogs Go to Heaven, and one I had never heard of called Where Children Play. There was a man in some kind of pig costume on the cover, which was kind of like Mickey Mouse, but instead of a mouse, it was a pig. He was wearing overalls as part of the costume. There were children surrounding him, and in the background was a playground. The title was displayed on the cover in those hideous colors from the 90s. Sorry if you ever had to sport those colors back in the day. According to the back of the cover, the tape consisted of 3 episodes. It took me a few days before I decided to actually watch the tape. I admit, I was kind of horrified by the creepiness of the pig, but I popped the tape in nonetheless. It started out with birds chirping and a friendly melody playing as the man in the pig costume walked awkwardly down a street. Children followed behind him, walking just as awkwardly. "Oh gee," he said suddenly. "I didn't see you there." They continued walking. "We're on our way to the playground. Care to join us? They were moving, but they didn't look like they were actually going anywhere, because they passed by the same park bench and trees over a dozen times. The birds chirping was clearly some kind of loop, because it was the same chirping sound over and over again. Well, let's go, the pigman yelled, just before the scene switched to the playground. Hello, boys and girls, he said, as he stood in a circle surrounded by children.
Hello, Mr. Piggyton,
the children yelled back. The next few minutes was nothing but children and the pigman singing songs. I recognized all of the songs they sung, except one that I had never heard before. Apparently it was the theme song to the movie. The lyrics of the chorus went like this: It's where the children play together and be best friends forever. Hide, and I will try to find you. We really love each other. Nothing could be better than spending forever with you. The melody of the song was the same as the melody from the start of the tape. There were adults in the background, sitting on benches, while either watching the children or reading a book or newspaper. I'm assuming they were the children's parents. After they got done singing, they played games such as hide and seek, kickball, tag, and hopscotch. It was just an innocent children's show, and I really enjoyed it. The pigman no longer creeped me out. He actually reminded me of Barney the dinosaur, with all the life lessons he would share, and it proved to be very educational. Usually the children would wave goodbye to the pigman, as they would head off home with their parents, as another episode started, but that didn't quite happen after the second episode. Instead, the third episode started out in some dark room, with a dim light flickering on and off. There was a man in the corner of the room, with his back turned from the camera. He was completely motionless as he hummed the melody to the show's theme song. After a while, the humming turned into loud singing, and he would get louder and louder before the door swung open, showing an agitated man with a wooden baseball bat. Shut the hell up, you fucking pig! The man yelled before throwing a slice of bread into the room. The guy moved from the corner of the room and crawled his way to the bread, sniffing it before shoving it down his throat. He then stood up and dragged himself to the door. More, he yelled, pounding on the door. I want more. Get the hell away from the door. A muffled voice yelled from the other side. But Daddy, I want more. It was odd hearing such a manly voice calling out Daddy. Get the hell away from the door. The muffled voice yelled even louder. The guy finally walked away from the door and sat in the middle of the room, where there was a pile of toys. Daddy is such a meanie, isn't he, Teddy? The guy asked a stuffed bear. Yes, he is, he replied to himself, but in a different voice. He grabbed a toy car from the pile. Vroom, vroom, he said as he slid the car across the room. The scene suddenly cut to a different setting. This time, it was the pigman standing alone in the street, while slowly dancing to his own humming. There were 3 ambulances in the background, and I watched as they carried a dead person into one of them. At that point, I should have turned it off, but I simply could not stop watching. I was staring into his dark eyes as he spun round and round. It felt so real, as if I was there, in that street, watching him. He then stopped dancing and turned to the camera. Shh, he whispered, with his finger pressed to his lips, before continuing his awkward, creepy dancing. The scene cut back to the room where the guy was playing with the toys. This went on for almost 10 minutes before his father walked in. Give me those goddamn toys, his father said, picking them up one by one. You're too old for this shit. But Daddy, he cried, please let me keep Teddy. He followed behind his father, who left the room, slamming the door shut on the way out. The guy sat on the floor crying before he suddenly stopped. At least I still have you, Toby, he said, but there was nobody else in the room. You'll never leave me, will you? He stood from the floor and laid down on his bed. I had a dream last night. Mr. Piggyton was real, and all of us children were dancing and singing along with him. You were there too, Toby. It was the best dream I ever had. He tucked himself under the thin white sheets. "One day, I'm gonna have my own town where only children can play, and nobody else. Just us children and Mr. Piggyton." Muffled sounds of yelling could be heard from outside the room. Mommy and Daddy are arguing again. He turned to his side, facing the dirty white wall, and began to loudly sing the show's theme song. He would get louder and louder as the muffled yells continued. Louder and louder he would get before the door swung open and that agitated man, his father, walked into the room holding a bat. "I told you to shut the hell up, didn't I?" he yelled before swinging the bat, hitting his son in the head. He was knocked unconscious and dragged out of the room by his father, a trail of blood following behind them. The scene cut to a guy sitting in the corner of the room, his head turned back to the camera. There was a giant bruise on the back of his head. He was rocking slowly back and forth, lightly banging his head off the wall. His father then walked into the room. "You quit that damn banging, you hear?" he said before throwing a slice of bread on the floor. The guy crawled over to the bread, showing his face to the camera. His father made sure he wouldn't be able to speak. He wouldn't be able to sing that song again. He had stitched his mouth shut. His father laughed at him as he desperately tried to eat the bread. He then left the room, and the guy stood up from the floor, before the tape cut yet again to a scene of the pigman standing alone in the middle of an abandoned playground. It was foggy out, and it was almost completely silent. The only thing that could be heard was the singing of children as it echoed through the old playground. They were singing the show's theme song. The pigman was completely motionless, staring into the camera with his dark eyes, before finally making a movement. He put his finger on his lips, and he whispered, "Shh." After the pigman had disappeared, the tape had cut back to the room, and what I saw finally made me decide to turn it off. The guy was hanging from the ceiling by his neck. His mouth was still stitched shut. As his body moved slowly side to side, the camera then began to move. Clearly somebody was moving it. As the camera turned to the other side of the room, I noticed the pig costume, set neatly on the floor. Its dark eyes were staring into the camera. The scene then changed to a bathroom, where I noticed the pigman was holding the camera in his right hand and a butcher knife in the other. His costume was stained in blood, appearing as if he had just slaughtered an animal. I turned the tape off right afterwards, but everything I saw on the tape already pierced into my mind as something I would have nightmares about almost every night. I didn't tell my mother about the tape, nor did I tell her about the nightmares that it caused. I can remember the nightmares very clearly, as if I'm not allowed to just forget about them forever. It's as if they were planted in the back of my mind and are never completely gone. On one of those nights, when I drifted off into a nightmare, I found myself alone in a silent town that looked to be abandoned. The walls of the buildings as well as the sidewalks had writing on them. Words such as Mr. Piggyton and play were drawn with chalk. There were also random names written as well. The most disturbing was a large drawing of the pigman. It was drawn on the walls of an abandoned candy store. Below that were the words, "Well, let's all have some fun." The streetlights flickered every other minute as the sun hid behind the clouds, keeping the town a bit gloomy. I continued walking, unsure of where to go, but desperate to get back home. As I walked, I could hear laughing children echo all around me, and then the melody of the theme song echoed along with them. Looking ahead, I saw something, or someone, standing off in the distance. It took me a dozen extra steps to see who it was. I stood in fear when I noticed the pigman in his blood-stained costume, watching me with a butcher knife in his hand. He just watched me, staring with the darkness of his eyes, paralyzing me. I heard him breathing. I felt his breath hit my cold, pale face. Even though I was still a distance away, he finally made a movement as he put his finger to his mouth and whispered, "Shh." The whisper echoed past the abandoned barber shop, past the pizza shop, and right through me. He then disappeared, leaving me alone in the abandoned town, but not for too long. I felt his breath as it hit the back of my neck. I turned around to complete darkness, a darkness that I would soon realize were his eyes. It was completely silent, but his high-pitched voice broke that silence. "Well, hello, Grayson," he said before I finally woke up from that nightmare. It was only a dream, but it felt so real. I had many different nightmares involving the Pigman, but none were as terrifying as the dream I had a few weeks after watching the tape. I was in a bedroom, walls written on with markers and crayons. I got out of the bed, that needless to say was not my own, and I made my way into the hall. I heard singing of children as their voices echoed from room to room. I looked in each of the rooms as I walked by, noticing nothing but toys and colorful written walls. I heard the music playing, the music from the tape, and I walked into a room, noticing it was coming from an old radio. Next to that old radio was a diary with Mr. Piggyton drawn on the cover. I opened the diary and read the first page. Mr. Piggyton said, "This is my new home. I like it here. I have so many toys. He said that I can stay here forever and ever. I love my new home. Mr. Piggyton gave me a choo-choo train. He made it for me and I like it a lot. I miss my mommy and daddy, but Mr. Piggyton said I can never see them again. It's okay because Mr. Piggyton said that I can have any toy I want. I can hear my mommy. She's crying for me to come home. Mr. Piggyton said that if I was a good boy, I could go home. I don't believe him." I closed the book and the dark eyes of Mr. Piggyton crept into my head. I didn't want to read his name, because every time I did, I would picture him standing off in the distance, holding a blood-covered knife in his hand. I walked out of the room, trying to shake him from my head, but that was impossible, because he was standing right at the end of the hall. I was not imagining it that time. He slowly walked up to me. He was holding a blue remote control race car in his arms. I backed up until my back hit the wall. He stood right in front of me, head tilted. "Hello, Grayson," he said in his goofy, high-pitched voice. "I made this just for you." I opened the staircase door and ran down the stairs. I looked behind me, noticing Mr. Piggyton following me. "Don't run, Grayson. I only want to play with you." I continued running. "It isn't safe to run down the stairs." I remembered him saying that in the videotape. "Watch me do it, Grayson. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot." Still I continued running. I ran through the door at the bottom of the stairs and ran down the hall until I saw somebody in one of the rooms. It looked like a young boy. He was wearing blue and white striped pajamas and just stood there, staring out the window with his back turned to me. I looked back, hearing Mr. Piggyton's voice echo out from behind the staircase door as he continued, "Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot." I went inside the room, despite the creepy kid staring out of his window, and I locked the door behind me. I slowly walked towards the kid and tapped his shoulder. He pointed outside. I glanced out of the window and saw nothing but an old abandoned theater. I looked around the room, noticing the writing was different from every other room I had been in. "I want more" was written all over the walls. The kid finally turned from the window, and I noticed his mouth was stitched shut. He had a name tag that read, "Hello, I'm Evan." He picked up a blue marker from the floor and wrote on the wall, pointing at his writing afterwards, "This is where the children play," he wrote. There was a loud knock at the door, and it shook the entire room. The kid sat in the corner, covering his ears, as he continually knocked his head against the wall. The pounding continued as I tried opening the window. The door eventually creaked open, and a piece of bread was thrown into the room. The kid, Evan, ran over to the bread and tried desperately to eat it, but his mouth had been sewn shut. There was no way he could. He then stood up and walked to the window. He stood there and pointed out. I looked again, noticing nothing but the old theater. I got closer to the window, trying to find what it was he wanted me to see. I noticed through the reflection on the window a name tag on my shirt. "Hello, I'm Grayson," it read. Mr. Piggyton suddenly appeared on the other side. "I made this for you, Grayson," his muffled voice said as he held the toy car up to the window. That's when I woke up. It still baffles me to think how I could still so vividly remember those nightmares. My 7th birthday finally came a day later. We had a party at the local playground, and for obvious reasons, I didn't want to be anywhere near a playground. I apparently had no choice because it was too late to have it anywhere else. Everything was okay at first. That is until I opened my gifts. I received more VHS tapes from my parents and grandmother. I also received clothes and toys, but what really scared me was the last present I opened. My mother read the writing on the tag. "To Grayson," she read. It had no other name on it, so nobody knew who it was from, but they had given it to me anyway. I opened it noticing it was a box, but it's what was inside the box that frightened me. I opened it and pulled out a blue remote control race car. I looked up from the table we were sitting at and saw a group of kids sitting in a circle nearby. In the middle of that circle was the pig man. He was watching me, staring at me with his dark eyes. He put his finger to his lips and then whispered, "Shh." The children were singing that goddamn song that I had grown so horrified of. I ran to my mother, who had no idea what was going on, and I just laid in her arms, watching Mr. Piggyton as he watched me. I never returned to any playground ever again. Years went by, and the nightmares finally stopped. The pigman was abandoned in the back of my mind, where he stayed there until a few months ago. I was cleaning out my closet, looking for old VHS tapes I could give to the local Goodwill. I thought that my mother had thrown it out, but apparently it was here. It was here all this time. I didn't remember much about it at first. The only thing I remembered was that I was really horrified by it for some reason. I put the tape in the donation box and kept the box in the closet until I went to the Goodwill the next day. The next morning I woke up to a song being played from the living room. I remembered the song, but I couldn't quite put my finger on where I heard it from. I walked into the living room and noticed my son Grady sitting in front of the television. "What you doing, buddy?" I asked. I looked up at the screen and noticed "Where Children Play" displayed in bright purple, teal, yellow, and pink colors, and that's when I saw him, Mr. Piggyton. I remembered how terrified I was of him. I told my kid to go make himself a bowl of cereal before school, and I sat in front of the television. I remembered every detail of the tape, even the scenes I had yet to be reunited with, even the dreadful nightmares they caused. After I dropped Grady off at school, I remember leaving off with Mr. Piggyton standing in front of the mirror, covered in blood, after which he left the room and walked through the house with the camera. In the living room was a woman laying on the ground. Bleeding from obvious stab wounds on her back, she appeared to be dead. As Mr. Piggyton passed through the kitchen, he stood in front of a decapitated man whose head was a few feet from his body. It was hard to tell, but I noticed that the man was the agitated father. He had visible stab wounds all over his body, from his neck down to his ankles. Mr. Piggyton sat down the camera and leaned over the body with a knife. "More!" he screamed as he continuously stabbed the body. "I want more!" He kept the knife on the floor, picked up the camera, and walked toward the front door. He was humming to that horrifying song as he left the room, leaving behind the brutally murdered corpses of his parents. The scene then cut to Mr. Piggyton dancing alone in the middle of the street, with 3 ambulances behind him. That went on for over an hour. Even after the ambulances had already left, the streetlights were flickering, and he was there, dancing in the middle of the street, to the sound of nothing. I'm sure in his mind, he was dancing to the tune of his theme song. After I watched the video, I buried it in my bedroom closet, keeping it away from my son and anyone else who would mistake it for an actual children's tape. I looked up Where Children Play online, but I couldn't find anything on it. I then searched Mr. Piggyton, and it took me a while before I could actually find something on him. I found a forum on Reddit that was posted a few months before. It had no replies, but it was posted by somebody named Casey Brandon 09. Here's what she wrote.
I'm not sure if anybody would believe me, and I don't care if you do or not. If you've ever heard of anybody named Mr. Piggyton, surely enough, you'd have to believe me. I first came across Mr. Piggyton when I was 6 years old. My mother would take my brother and I to the playground in our hometown. Mr. Piggyton showed up one day, appearing from the woods that was near the playground. He was a man in a pig costume, wearing overalls. Anyway, Mr. Piggyton may seem fun and normal at first, but he's far from it. He's actually a nightmare that you cannot escape or wake from. He is the reason that some children can't sleep at night, and the reason that others are mysteriously missing. I've had nightmares about him up until I was 10, and then they recently returned. I just want to warn any parents out there whose children ever heard or spoke the name Mr. Piggyton. He may seem imaginary, and you may not be able to see him, but I assure you he is real. And he is kidnapping children all over the world. Please, help me stop Mr. Piggyton.
I replied to the post, but never got an answer. Months went by, and I decided just to forget about the tape and everything dealing with Mr. Piggyton. My son, who was only 6 years old at this time, had this imaginary friend named Neil since he was about 3. I thought he was finally over his imaginary friend phase, but one night, I heard him talking to somebody who, in my mind, was not there. "Who are you talking to?" I asked as I entered his bedroom. "Nobody." He was always a bit shy when it comes to his imaginary friend. "Is it Neil?" I asked. He shook his head no. He doesn't want me to call him Neil anymore. He looked towards the closet door and smiled. I didn't see anybody, but I felt something. It was a feeling I cannot explain, a feeling that we weren't alone in that room. "Because now he has a real name," he said. "What's his real name?" He looked over to the door behind me, a big smile on his face. "What's his real name?" I asked again. I'm not sure what I expected for him to say, but this sure wasn't it. "His name is Mr. Piggyton."
Number 3.
Graphic warning. I grew up as an only child in a very high-tech family. My dad was a broadcast engineer for KTCI in St. Paul, and my mom was a computer programmer for a company that made dental record-keeping software. I followed in my mother's footsteps to become a computer programmer. Her and I were always rather close. I scored a rather well-paying first job with a rather well-known aerospace firm. They were located in Maryland, so I had to make quite a big move. Being a bit of a pack rat as a teenager, I loaded up about 10 boxes worth of what was admittedly junk and packed it in the back of a U-Haul, and the three of us made a nearly 16-hour trip to Clarksville. My mom and dad couldn't stay very long due to mom having run up all her vacation time, so they didn't do much other than help me bring in boxes, and departed shortly after. Unpacking throughout the evening, I discovered many of these boxes contained things I hadn't seen in years. It was always a nice nostalgia trip to go through all these links to the past. I had my high school planner, the composition notebook I filled with crudely drawn newspaper-style comics, toys I loved and had long forgotten about. One of these things I found at the bottom of the box was an old VHS tape. Scrawled across the front were things like Michael playing, July 1994, Michael's 4th birthday, October 1994, Immediately I recognized it as one of the many childhood family videos my dad made when I was a baby. My dad was not only a broadcast engineer, he was an out-and-out audio-video enthusiast. This video had to have been one of 50 made of us. I remember quite well watching a few of them with family during the fits of nostalgia we had together. But because there were so many, I don't remember having seen all of them. A great deal of them were simple, mundane things, like going to the park, or me playing Nintendo. Nothing all that interesting or remarkable. That being said, I'm a sucker for nostalgia, and I wanted to relive just a part of what I remember to be the happiest days of my life in infancy. I had long since disposed of my VCR, so that following weekend I made a trip to the flea market to pick up a new one so I could watch this video. One salesman had a ton of them new in box. He said they were unsold stock discovered in a shipping container. You couldn't go wrong with a VCR in new condition for $10. I drove home, plugged it into the last TV I had with composite inputs, and popped in the tape. The tape began with the customary blank static, and then scan lines disappearing as they floated over a muddied window to happier times. There I was, in my old bedroom, playing with one of my favorite teddy bears as Mom sat next to me. I even remembered how much I loved that toy. A white teddy bear that played a cute piezoelectric tune when he was squeezed. He even had a heart that would shine many colors as the song played. I was tempted to shed a tear at the innocent and childish love I had once felt for that toy. Something stopped me from doing so. Some kind of inexplicable restraint. It was just a dumb toy after all. A part of me wondered where he was today, and the other part of me cynically remarked how surely there were hundreds and thousands of bears of the same type. Mindlessly and thoughtlessly produced by a factory, I wanted to find him and hug him right then and there. But again, I reminded myself, it was just a dumb toy. My dad had been filming the scene right in front of my mother and I. I kept hugging the toy to hear the tiny song play and its plastic heart shine joyfully. Mom remarked how the toy and I were inseparable, and from behind the camera you could hear my dad agree. He sounded strangely disinterested. I thought perhaps he was tired. Mom eventually fetched a basket from across the room containing all sorts of stuffed animals and brought them to where I was, planting them in between us.
Watch this. Michael, do you want to play with Goofy?